The sun is setting in California as a high-stakes special election enters its final hours. Voters are deciding whether to fire Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom or to let him keep his job. Welcome to our coverage of the California recall. I'm Jake Tapper in the CNN Election Center. We are standing by right now for the first results after polling places close at the top of the next hour. There are two questions on the ballot for Californians. The first asks whether Governor Newsom should be recalled, removed as governor of California. If no wins that, then Newsom remains in office. He'll hold on to the seat for Democrats and dodge a huge defeat in deep blue California. Now, on the other hand, if yes wins, then Newsom is gone. He's removed from office, delivering a major victory to Republicans behind the recall drive. And the second question on the ballot asks, well, who should replace Newsom if he's recalled? A whopping 46 candidates are on that ballot. Most of them are Republicans. Conservative talk radio host Larry Elder has emerged as the clear frontrunner, despite a history of controversial statements. The first-time candidate supported former President Trump and is borrowing from his playbook. For instance, making baseless claims of election fraud before one vote has even been counted. Other prominent Republican candidates include former Olympian and reality TV star Caitlyn Jenner, former gubernatorial nominee John Cox, former San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer, and former state assemblyman Kevin Kiley. There are some Democrats on the ballot as well, with YouTube personality Kevin Paffrath considered the leader of the Democrats. Top Democrats are supporting Governor Newsom, of course. President Biden and Vice President Harris stumped with him in the closing days of the campaign, warning that this election has national consequences, and it does. We have correspondents at Newsom headquarters in Sacramento and other key locations as we track the votes being cast today and the millions of ballots already cast by mail during early voting. First, let's go to Kyung La covering Governor Newsom. Kyung?
Well, Jake, the message that we are getting from Team Newsom is confidence. The team is feeling very confident in this last hour of voting, and a top advisor is telling me, quote, the blue tide keeps rising. So what is he talking about? He's talking about turnout. The campaign is seeing strong turnout across the state, and the anticipation is that they may indeed set a record when it comes to percentages. What am I talking about? In 2003, the last gubernatorial recall, that was a special statewide election record set at 61% turnout. Now, this year, there are obviously more registered voters. So we'll have to sort the math at the end of the night when we look at all of the figures. But what this turnout means is good news for Team Newsom, because Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1. The more people who vote, the better the numbers for Governor Newsom. And one last thing, Jake, what we are hearing is that pushing the governor over that finish line, believes this team, is that last-minute appearance by President Biden. Jake?
All right, Kyung La, let's go now to Stephanie Elam in Orange County, which could, of course, be key in this recall. Stephanie.
Jake, you're right. And part of the reason why it could be key is just what you see here. You see this long line of people. It's only gotten longer as people have finished up their workday and they've shown up here. Orange County is known for being a Republican stronghold. You've got a lot of Republican voters here. And many of the people that I've spoken to said that they wanted to make sure that their vote was counted. And that is why they're showing up to do this in person. We've talked to people who said that they think Newsom has done an awful job. They want him out of the office. We talked to one woman who says this is a giant waste of time because they have an election just next year for the governor's office. And then another person who just said, overall, she thinks that this is a good idea because this will make sure that our elected leaders are held accountable either way that this election goes here today. But this line now is wrapping around the block. They will come through here just to show you what's going to happen here. These folks are standing in line to make it inside, and based on what we've seen before, it's a line about an hour long based on what we've seen. Then they go in here to the library, they go inside, they get their ballot, they go to a kiosk, they fill it out, and then just by themselves, they scan it in. There's someone there to show them how to do it, so they are scanning in their individual ballots themselves. But as you can see here, there is a lot of activity in Orange County, and obviously Republicans are hoping that this will break their way in a county that has traditionally gone for the Republicans, but not always, as the demographics have changed here in Orange County. Jake?
Orange County could be key to the results tonight. Stephanie Elam, thank you so much. Let's go to Pamela Brown now. She's tracking the ballots at our voting desk. And Pamela, what are you going to be looking for tonight?
Well, Jake, the big question in the California recall election is who is going to vote. And if Democrats, as Kyung pointed out, who outnumber Republicans 2-1, will turn out in the state to keep Governor Gavin Newsom in office for the remainder of his first term. So let's take a look at the latest numbers, keeping in mind that all active registered voters in California received ballots in the mail, and all counties kept one or more early voting locations open at least since last Saturday. So as of Monday, more than 9.1 million Californians had cast their ballots. But look at this comparison right here. That is about 3 million less than the number of pre-election votes cast just before the 2020 presidential election. What is the voter breakdown so far? Well, as you see, majority Democrats who are more likely to vote by mail. And look at this breakdown. Nearly identical to the breakdown of pre-election day voters just before the November 2020 presidential election. Jake?
All right, Pamela, thanks so much. Let's go to John King at the Magic Wall now. And John, what is Governor Newsom's path towards surviving the recall?
So just as we prepare to count votes in about an hour, just to remind our viewers, keep Newsom as blue. He's a Democratic governor. You want to keep him, you'll see the counties fill in blue. If the counties are saying, no, we want to recall him, they'll fill in red. So what does he need to win? As Kyung was just pointing out, and Stephanie, California's an overwhelmingly Democratic state. Let's go back to 2018. This is when Gavin Newsom was elected governor. He got 62% of the vote against the Republican candidate 32. What Gavin Newsom needs, forget the numbers for a minute, even forget the percentages for a minute. What he needs, Jake, is for the map to look something like this. Because if it looks anything close to this, he will not be recalled. He will get to finish his term. Why do I say that? You do see a lot of red. Remember the presidential election. In some states, even that Joe Biden carried, you see a lot of red. Not a lot of people live in the northern part of the state in these rural counties. There are 58 counties in California. This one's the 18th largest. That's not bad. You move up here, you get 18 to 58. You come down, and you start to shrink these counties as you come through. The population. So what has to happen here? If the map fills in like this, anything like this, Gavin Newsom continues as governor because of all these red counties, only 2 are in the top 10. This is the nation's most populous state. Only 2. One of them is right here. So we'll watch Riverside County tonight. It is, it's the 4th or 5th largest county right there. You watch that one. The other one that is red on this map that was not red in the presidential election is you come up here, and it's Fresno County, the Central Valley part of the state. A lot of COVID disruption. A lot of the signatures to get the recall on the ballot came from in here, right here. So even here, this was pretty close, right? It's pretty close. If it's pretty close tonight, even if it's red, Gavin Newsom is fine. The people live in the bigger counties here. Los Angeles, this is the #1 county in the state by far. This will be a big test for Democrats. Kyung Law says the Newsom campaign is confident they're turning out. Here's your big test. Or Democrats turning out, or Latinos, a subset of Democrats turning out. We'll leave that here. This is where you just talked to Stephanie. Yes, this used to be the bedrock of the California Republican Party. Orange County, Ronald Reagan, the home of the party in those days. But look, it was 50-50. And if you come back to the presidential race, it was even more so in Orange County. If there is to be a revolt against Gavin Newsom tonight, just about every Republican in California has to come out and vote no. And then a whole lot of Democrats in a state, let's go back to the governor's race, in a state that is overwhelmingly Democratic. Not only do all these Republicans have to vote, but a lot of Democrats in these blue areas, either a combination of staying home or coming out to vote no. There's no evidence of that, but we're going to get to count votes pretty soon.
I'm not saying it's the same thing, but there was a recall in 2003, and a Democratic governor was replaced by a Republican. So it can happen even in true blue California.
It can happen. One point since then, let me just show this since you asked the question. It's important to note. Even since then, the percentage, this is back then, that was back there 18 years ago. Since then, the percentage of Republicans has dropped. So what the Republicans need, essentially, is not only, there are fewer Republicans. So back here, Arnold Schwarzenegger had a lot of Republicans who wanted to get rid of Gray Davis. But you're right. They needed some Democratic help and some independent help, and they got it back then. Now they need, for it to happen this time, they need even more of that, more of a revolt.
All right. As we count down to the polls closing in California, we're getting an early read on what voters are thinking from our exit polls, and there's much more of our special coverage ahead. We'll be right back. Welcome back. California voters are making a big decision tonight on whether to boot Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom from office or to keep him around. We expect the first results after the top of the hour when polling places close across the Golden State. We're getting an early read, however, on what California voters are thinking as they cast their ballots. David Chalian is tracking our exit polls. And David, what are you learning?
Well, we're taking a look at some key political dynamics. You were talking with John King about the Democratic nature of the state of California. That's certainly true. You talked about those registration statistics of Democrats outnumbering Republicans 2-1. But what matters, of course, is the electorate that shows up. So in these early exit poll numbers, we have a sense 43% of the voters in this recall identify as Democrat, 31% independent, 26% Republican. Not quite the 2-1 advantage that exists in registration. This is what we mean when we say it all comes down to turnout. Take a look also, of course, at the president's approval rating. You saw him come in at the end of this campaign. Here's why. 56% of California voters in this recall approve of the job Joe Biden is doing. That is better, as you would suspect in California, than he performs nationally with his job approval rating. Again, getting at that Democratic advantage that Republicans have to overcome tonight. Also, just views of each party. What are your views of the Democratic Party? Views of the Republican Party? In this electorate tonight, those voters participating in this recall, according to these early numbers, and these will shift throughout the night, Jake, 52% of voters in the recall have a favorable view of the Democratic Party compared to 43% who have an unfavorable view. We'll take a look at how people think about the Republican Party in terms of the voters today in this recall. Only 32% of voters in this recall have a favorable view of the Republican Party. Nearly 2/3 have an unfavorable view of the Republican Party. These are the political dynamics at play, and I think it gets at the steep mountain decline. As you noted, Republicans were able to do so in 2003, but this is the steep mountain decline for Republicans tonight.
All right, David Chalian, thanks so much. Dana Bash and Nia Malika Henderson and Casey Hunt. Let me start with you, Dana. What are you going to be looking for tonight? Is it just turnout in the big cities? Are you going to be looking to see how many conservatives turn out in the red counties?
All of the above. But what David just showed us was so fascinating when it comes to the California electorate. It may be a telltale sign on what could happen to other states where you're seeing a change in demographics. The Republican Party, and I'm going to give credit to our colleague Terrence Burley because he first said this to me, is the third party in California. It's the Democrats, and then it's the unaffiliated independents, and then it's the Republicans. And it was a decline from the last recall in 2003, but it just shows how changes can affect things. And it also is a reminder of why Gavin Newsom had President Biden, the vice president, and key senators, because this is all about making the Democrats, who are the vast majority of the electorate in California, anxious and worried enough to get out and actually vote, to counter the anger that is very real and very palpable for a lot of reasons in California, to counter the anger that people have towards him for all of the reasons that we know about. And it seems as though it was the steepest of hills to climb.
And the anger initially around this recall was over COVID and his handling of COVID
restrictions.
COVID restrictions. Yeah. People thought he was going too far, but also sort
Dinner
of flouting
French
the
laundry.
rules. Exactly, flouting the rules personally. So this is how this gained steam. And then the Delta variant came along and things changed all of a sudden. Also, Larry Elder emerged. But that's what's most interesting to me, that this, again, as was 2020, this seems to be a COVID election. And what was really interesting, it came at a time, Delta came along, and then you had the sort of foil that Ron DeSantis was, I think, for this election. Somebody like Greg Abbott in Texas. You saw California do pretty well in terms of vaccine mandates, in terms of mask mandates, things that were very popular among the constituents there because it allowed them to get back to normal, but also stay safe, a situation that's vastly different in places like Florida and Texas.
Can we, just to pull the lens out a little bit here and think about, what this means in context, though, I have to say, and I've been talking to both Republicans and Democrats, and they're sort of reading from the same page, which is that this should not have been as hard as it actually was for Newsom in the middle of the summer. He was coasting along early in the summer. They got a couple polls that showed in a state, David Chalian showed us the numbers here, in a state that's overwhelmingly Democratic, he potentially had some real issues, and they actually did have to engage. They had to start painting Larry Elder as a Trumpian candidate to galvanize Democrats to get out and vote because they were scared.
And on that point, as you note, the polls were narrower in the summer. And I've heard Democratic consultants say that the best thing that happened to Gavin Newsom was that Larry Elder shot up in the polls among the alternatives, because that enabled him, instead he was, or you might remember a few months ago, he was just like criticizing President Trump, and he was criticizing the recall people. And now all of a sudden, you and I have heard Joe Biden say this a million times, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative.
Right,
Now he had an alternative.
At the end of the day, what elections are all about. And the fact that Newsom actually had to do that because there was someone who was, actually threatening him enough in that early polling, I think tells you that, hey, there was a real risk. But I think it also shows you a blueprint for both Democrats and Republicans in the midterm elections going forward as well. I mean, just to remind everyone, Larry Elder is a conservative talk radio host. He's well known among the Republican base in California. He has a long track record of saying really controversial things. And so it was pretty easy for the Newsom campaign to say, hey, you should be scared of this guy. So the reality, though, I think if you look at these swing districts, and Dana, I know, I mean, you've covered so many of these midterm elections, and Democrats now are so worried about hanging on to the House, they're likely to lose it. If they're running against an anonymous Republican, there are real questions about whether Democrats can govern in California. Just look at homelessness and COVID and some of these other issues.
No, you're exactly right. And the way that a Newsom advisor described it to me, I thought was really good. That pre-Larry Elder, the foils that he had, governors in Texas and Florida and COVID, he was punching the air. Gavin Newsom was punching the air. There was nothing really for him to grab onto.
It was all about the bad things he had done.
And then he had somebody, Larry Elder and the others, where it personified and exemplified to voters what could be if he actually is.
Even I think as it was about Elder, it was also about Trump, right? This idea. I think probably the best quote from this was from Gavin Newsom saying, listen, Trump isn't on the ballot, but Trumpism is.
Yeah, and we're nearing a critical hour in the California recall. When the polls close and the first votes come in, our special coverage continues right after this quick break. Stay with us. There is a long line to vote in Huntington Beach as Californians are deciding if Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom stays or goes. Polling places close at the top of the hour in this consequential recall election. The first question on the ballot is the key one, asking if Governor Newsom should be recalled, should be removed. Newsom is counting on the no votes to win, allowing him to remain in office. But if a majority of Californians vote yes on the first question, Newsom will be removed as governor and replaced. And in that case, question 2 kicks in. Voters are choosing among 46 candidates there to take Newsom's job if he is ousted. We're getting a new read of the thinking inside the Newsom campaign. Let's go to Maeve Reston in Los Angeles. Maeve, what are you hearing from the Democrats about Latino turnout today?
So obviously, Jake, this was a huge concern for Democrats as recently as a week ago, that they were going to see an underperformance among Latino voters. And that community obviously has been hit the hardest by COVID-19. But there are some signs, strategists were telling me today, that has begun to turn around. And if that trend holds, like we're seeing in the exit polls, where they are a decent share of the electorate, they think that the turning point will be the fact that the governor really ramped up his outreach to that community, began talking about Elder's statements on immigration, some of his xenophobic rhetoric, and they're saying that this is a sign now that these voters are coming back to Newsom, but saying, don't take us for granted.
All right. Interesting. Very interesting. Maeve Reston, there's obviously a very different view from the campaign of the top Republican challenger for Newsom's job. Conservative talk radio host Larry Elder and Lucy Kafanov is at Elder's campaign headquarters. And Lucy, what are you hearing from Team Elder?
Well, Jake, the Elder campaign is describing this as a victory party. We know that Larry Elder is in the hotel here at the Hilton in Costa Mesa. He is watching the returns. He's doing radio interview hits. We understand that the Newsom camp is suggesting that they are not seeing day of Republican turnout, a surge in that, which is something that Elder would need in order to overcome the early return lead. But a senior aide to the Elder campaign is disputing that characterization. He is, or they, that aide is saying that they are confident that they will see an in-person voter turnout. They would not discuss the campaign's internal targets, but the aide said, quote, "We haven't had a recall election here in 18 years. I think what everybody is modeling is off."
Now, we understand that the campaign is expecting to see, they're counting on independents turning out for Larry Elder, and while they do expect the numbers to show higher for Gavin Newsom initially because of those mail-in ballots, we know a lot of the Republican voters say that they will be voting in person, and so they expect a surge once the in-person numbers are in. Jake?
All right, Lucy Kafanov at Elder Campaign Headquarters, where the band is tuning up, I guess. We're closing in on the end of the voting in the California recall and the first results on the fate of Governor Gavin Newsom. We also have some breaking news on the top U.S. general's secret action to try to keep nuclear weapons safe from then President Trump. That's all ahead. Stay with us. As we await the results from the California recall, we do have some breaking news to share with you. Chilling new revelations about the top U.S. general's response to the peril posed by Donald Trump at the end of his presidency. After the January 6th insurrection, General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, took secret action to potentially limit then President Trump's ability to order a nuclear strike or other military strike. He feared that the commander-in-chief was erratic and potentially would go rogue. This is one of the headlines from the new book, Peril, by Washington Post journalists Bob Woodward and Bob Costa. CNN special correspondent Jamie Gangel got an early copy of the book. And Jamie, tell us about this early, this meeting that Milley had at the Pentagon.
So he is concerned about Trump. It's 2 days after January 6th, and these were precautions. He was trying to make sure the guardrails are in place, but it is an extraordinary meeting. He calls in the generals and the colonels who run the Pentagon War Room, and he says to them, according to the book, quote, "If you get calls, no matter who they're from, there's a process here, there's a procedure. No matter what you're told, you do the procedure. You do the process, and I'm part of that procedure." He wanted to make sure there were no dangerous or illegal orders. He's looking at Donald Trump. He's worried about January 6th. And he also knows that the Chinese have been rattled by Trump's behavior and by his failure to concede. And he is making sure every precaution is in place.
In the book, it speculates that this news might prompt some individuals to criticize Milley for suggesting that Milley overstepped his authority, that he was doing something that he doesn't have the right to do.
Correct. Some people may, but
Marco Rubio called for his resignation, I think.
I think there are going to be some politics involved here, and I don't think Marco Rubio has read the book yet. I would suggest people read the book and look at it in context. It is true that he is not, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, in the chain of command. However, he is the most senior military official. He is the advisor to the president. He has tremendous authority. And what he was doing here was making sure the guardrails were up, that there wasn't some kind of accident. One senior Republican source said to me tonight, quote, "No one should be criticizing Milley. They all knew Trump was bonkers." That's a quote. Milley stood up and took precautions to make sure nothing dangerous or illegal happened. He was just making sure all the procedures and processes were followed.
And we should also note, this came after a conversation that General Milley had with Speaker Pelosi.
Correct.
Where Milley was saying there are guardrails. And Pelosi was saying, guardrails? Look at what just happened with the riot on the Capitol that the president incited. Nobody was stopping President Trump from doing that. And that's what prompted Milley to do this.
100%. He knew China was rattled. He knew what he had seen on January 6th. But he had also now been through months, years of Trump's explosive behavior. And Woodward and Costa write that Milley was increasingly worried that Trump was, after the election, suffering serious mental decline, and that he was unpredictable and unstable.
The book also talks about then Vice President Mike Pence reaching out for advice on what to do in the House of Representatives on January 6th. Trump was suggesting that he had some sort of magic power to overturn the election, which he does not have. What does it say, the book?
So what the book recounts is a rather striking scene between Mike Pence, and he reaches out to former Vice President Dan Quayle.
Dan Quayle. George H.W. Bush's vice president.
Also from Indiana. And what's striking is that over and over, Mike Pence appears to be looking for a way to help Trump. We know that he got to the right place on the 6th. It may be because of Dan Quayle and this conversation. In the book, quote, Quayle says to Mike Pence, Mike, you have no flexibility on this, none, zero, forget it, put it away. Pence comes back. You don't know the position I'm in. Quayle cuts him off. I do know the position you're in. I know what the law is. You listen to the parliamentarian. That's all you do. You have no power.
The wise words of former Vice President
Correct.
Dan Quayle: stick to the Constitution,
Correct.
Pence. And he did. Jamie Gangel, thanks so much. The polls close in California very soon. Stay with us for the very first votes that will indicate whether or not Governor Newsom stays or goes. We'll squeeze in a quick break. We'll be right back.
It is crunch time in California as voting winds down. The recall election that's deciding if Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom is kicked out of office or not. We are approaching the top of the hour, a little bit more than 15 minutes away, when polling places close across the state of California and the first votes can be reported. There's a lot going on. We're going to talk with our team right here on the ground. David Axelrod, what are you anticipating for tonight?
Well, look, everything's pointed to the governor surviving, and if he does, it'll be for three reasons. They really followed a textbook, which is, one, when you're in trouble, don't let it become a referendum on you, make it a choice. The second was to make it a partisan fight in a state where you have an overwhelming Democratic edge. And the third is define the choice, define the stakes. And Larry Elder gave them a good target for that, and COVID became the backdrop for it. If you elect this guy, he's going to roll back all these protections, the mask mandates, the vaccine requirements, and we're going to be like Florida. We're going to be like Texas. And then, you know, the overlay is Trump as part of this. So it's a formula, and it took them from a close race in polling to a big lead. We'll see if that lead holds up tonight.
Rob Stutzman, you were involved in the 2003 recall. You became the Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Schwarzenegger. Obviously, this is a very different recall than 2003.
Yeah, there's no Arnold Schwarzenegger, for one. But the state is, the growth in Democrat over Republican in the last 18 years is 3-1. It's really become out of reach for Republicans. To have a chance to win in a state like this, you need to follow the playbook of where there's Republicans in blue states, like a Larry Hogan of Maryland. Larry Elder is maybe the antithesis of that type of Republican. And so he's played well to the small, hardy band of Republican base, but it's going to be completely insufficient in a blue state like California on a night like this.
The only reason there was this recall is because there was a lot of unhappiness with Newsom over the way he had handled the pandemic initially. They felt that was too much Big Brother, too many restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. Then came the Delta variant, and life changed, and people were worried about being safe. And I think right now, as we look at the results tonight, and if we get the results tonight, we're going to have a question about how the public feels in a way, and again, California is a different state, about embracing these mandates. You do have two governors' races coming up in New Jersey and Virginia. Both of those governors are very strongly pro-mandate. They're going to be looking at what happens in California tonight and see how that goes.
I think there's a danger of overinterpreting a number of things. Assuming that Gavin does well, you could underestimate the amount of misery and frustration at the base for both parties in California. Because right now it's just, do you want Larry Elder or not? There's still big problems baked into that state. You've got wildfires, you've got droughts, you've got a pandemic, you've got a lot of discontent. It's just, there's no place to go. You can't go with Larry Elder. So you could underestimate the amount of pain at the base for the party, and you could overestimate the amount of enthusiasm for these mandates with regard to masks and with regard to vaccines. Liberals and progressives assume that everybody agrees with us, but it's not just right-wingers that have concerns about these mandates. You also have a bunch of people of color who are still vaccine hesitant. So it's going to be important, I think, that we don't get out over our skis and overinterpret. But I will say this. With regard to Gavin Newsom, This guy, his future is on the line today. If he does get beat, he's Gray Davis. Gray Davis is like a forgotten man now in California politics because he was recalled in favor of Schwarzenegger. But if he wins, he's Scott Walker. Scott Walker had to fight off a major recall effort in Wisconsin, did it, and then he went on to become a viable presidential candidate.
I'm not sure he wants to be the new Scott Walker.
Well, Scott Walker, in terms of becoming a national figure.
Does the margin matter?
I think the margin does matter.
We should point out Gray Davis lost to Arnold Schwarzenegger. That would be different than losing to Larry Elder.
But what are the ripple effects for
Well, I
Newsom?
think to look at where the margin should be. So California has been a 62-38 D versus R state in the last two elections. That's how much Newsom won by. That's how much Biden beat Trump by. So anything less than that 20 to 22 points tonight means he's underperforming really what the baseline should be.
So you're saying if he gets less than a 20-point margin, I think you're overstating
it goes to turnout and turnout mix, but if the recall doesn't go down by 20 points, then Newsom has underperformed really what Democrats should be doing in California. It's a little bit to your point, Van, about there are these underlying problems that are so frustrating a lot of Californians.
I think that's right. I'd see it slightly differently, only in that this is an off year, off month, off the wall election. And so I do think that, Republicans have been much more enthusiastic about the recall the whole time. The Democrats just got into gear the past couple of weeks. So
we're going to take a quick break. We're closing in on the first results in the fate of California Governor Gavin Newsom. Find out ahead. We'll be right back.
In California right now, voting is winding down across the state. We are counting down to the first results on whether Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom will be removed from office, recalled. And if he goes, who will replace him? The outcome will have a major impact on the state and on national politics. The first question on the ballot will decide Newsom's fate. Voters are asked whether he should be recalled, removed. If no wins, then the Democrat will remain in office and his party will avoid an embarrassing defeat in one of the nation's bluest states. But if yes wins, Newsom will be removed. That hands a big win for Republicans who fought to oust him. The second question on the ballot asks voters to choose, if Newsom is removed, who with. There are 46 candidates vying to replace Newsom if he's fired. The top contender, according to polls, Republican Larry Elder. He's a conservative talk radio host, Trump supporter, and he is known for generating controversy. As we count down to the top of the hour, let's go to our correspondents who are on the ground in California. First to Maeve Reston in Los Angeles. Maeve, what are you hearing from the Newsom camp about their ground game today?
So one of the reasons that Newsom strategists are so optimistic about tonight's results is because of their ground game here in California, which they scrambled to pull together over the last 10 weeks or so when they finally got a date and could tell voters what they would need to do on that date. When I spoke to the head of Newsom's ground game just a short while ago, she said that they've had real conversations now with about 1.5 million voters over that tiny short period of time. And so that's very unusual for a state campaign here in California, where normally all of this just plays out on the airwaves. Jake.
All right, Maeve Reston, thanks so much. Let's go to Josh Campbell now. He's in San Francisco. And Josh, how are local officials preparing to keep the votes secure as they count the ballots?
Yeah, Jake, despite this barrage of conspiracy theories that we've heard, officials here have actually been working for months to prepare for the security and the integrity of this election. Officials tell us, for example, that the by-mail and in-person voting, it all has extensive tracking logs, a paper trail, if you will. So from the scanning to the tabulation to what comes after, all of that has data that surrounds it. We're also told that after Election Day, a manual count is actually done to ensure that the records that posted on Election Day and shortly thereafter match what actually happened to these ballots. We're also told, Jake, that what we will see here shortly, sheriff's deputies escort all of the ballots from the 580 locations where the votes are cast in this city to this location under heavy security, again, to ensure the integrity of this election, Jake.
All right, Josh, thanks so much. Let's go to Pamela Brown now. She's tracking the ballots at our voting desk. And Pamela, when we get the first votes, where are they going to come from?
Well, Jake, as all eyes are on California right now, where polls are just minutes away from closing in the special recall election of a Democratic Governor Newsom, we expect to see our first reports of pre-election votes shortly. But for now, let's just take a look at roughly what we expect to see from the three largest counties in the state. We're going to start with L.A. and Los Angeles County. We expect about 1.9 million votes. Then you go over to San Diego County. We're expecting 850,000 votes there. And then in Orange County, there are about 800,000. Now, these first results will give us a look at how well Democrats did in pre-election voting. So how fast will results come in? Let's look at the November 2020 election right now. By midnight Eastern on election night, 56% of California votes were counted. And then by noon on Wednesday, 68% of votes were counted. So in the next few hours, we should see a lot of the vote. But if it's close, it could take some time to know the results. Jake.
All right, Pamela, thanks so much. I'm here now with John King at the Magic Wall. John, walk us through what to expect in the next hour.
Number one, Jake, the great thing about what's about to happen is we get to count votes. So we get to put to the test all those things the campaigns are saying. The Newsom campaign says their turnout machine, participation machine is off the charts. We're going to get to test that. I'll show you where in just a second. The Elder campaign says, no, wait a minute. Republicans are going to turn out in huge numbers on Election Day, so just wait. Don't jump ahead. Well, we'll get to put that to the test pretty soon. So here's your map of California. As you know, this is a quirky recall. Keep Newsom, recall Newsom. That's the biggest question, right? That's the biggest question. Only if yes wins does the second question matter. Now, we will get to see these results. We'll get to see what happens, but they don't matter unless yes is in play, right? But we'll get to see who of the 46 candidates, we show you the top 6 or so in the polling here, we'll get to this, but it only matters if, back on question one, if yes is in play as we start to count votes through the night. Now, Pam Brown just made a very important point. We lived through this back in November. The first ballots we see will be mail-in ballots. Democrats have tended to vote disproportionately by mail-in ballots. So you may see no jump out to a huge early lead. It may hold, it may not. So be patient as we count the votes. So what are we going to look for? Let's use the 2018 California map. It underscores how steep the challenge is for those who want red tonight. This was the Republican candidate in 2018. Red tonight will be yes on the recall. For the map to be red, the math is just overwhelmingly against Republicans and Democrats and independents who have moved away in California. So what are we going to look at? Mae Vereston just said the Newsom campaign thinks it's turning out Democrats. Well, Los Angeles is 26% of the statewide population. It is the largest by far of the counties. If Democrats are turning out, we will get evidence of it right here. Gavin Newsom, before he was governor, he was mayor up here in San Francisco. So in Alameda County, that's Oakland. You come across the bay, it's hard to get, it hides back there. Let me pull it out for you. We can do that. We can bring it over. It hides San Francisco. Our Democrats, look at these percentages. It was 80% in his governor's race, 86% in the governor's race. If Democrats are turning out, if the Newsom campaign is correct, we will see it here. We will also find out not only if Democrats are turning out in high numbers, what percentage of Democrats, what evidence do we get that some Democrats are defecting? How big is that as it plays out? For yes to have any chance, you see the red on this map? These are the counties that voted Republican back in the 2018 race for governor. Republicans have to turn out in overwhelming numbers here, especially in the more populous places like Riverside County down here. Republicans have to have a rebound, or yes forces have to have a rebound in places like Orange County. The numbers have to be overwhelming because, Jake, we know this. If it's just Republicans, even if every Republican comes out and votes yes, it won't be enough. There has to be a Democratic revolt and an independent revolt against Gavin Newsom.
All right, John King, thanks so much. We're just moments away from the polls closing in California, just 17 seconds. The fate of Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom and his party's hold on the top office in that critical blue state is now in the hands of voters. Now let's get a key race alert. This election is too early to call, but based on our exit polls, it looks like it's going to be a good night for Governor Gavin Newsom. We are not yet able to make a projection, but CNN is getting an initial read on the state of the race. We can report that the no vote, rejecting Newsom's removal as governor, the no vote has an early lead in our exit poll. Now, if that lead holds, Newsom will remain as governor of California. Let's get more from David Chalian. And David, what's behind this encouraging news for Gavin Newsom?
Well, issue number one, Jake, is the coronavirus. It's the most important issue on California voters' minds in this election. And we asked folks, what do you think about the current COVID situation in California? the plurality here, 39% of voters in this election say it's getting better, 31% staying the same, only a quarter say that it's getting worse. And I want to now show you that getting better contingent. Those 39%, how do they split on the recall? Look at this. 64% of them say no, keep Gavin Newsom in office. Only 36% say yes to the recall, looking to fire the governor. He's winning the biggest slice of coronavirus voters that say, hey, we think things are getting better here. We also looked at a couple key demographics that are making up why he's leading in this race right now. Among Latino voters, 58% say no to the recall, keep Gavin Newsom. 42% say yes to the recall. Now, that's a narrower margin of victory with Latinos than Newsom had 3 years ago in the 2018 governor's race. But it's still a category he's winning by 16 percentage points, and Latinos have grown their share of the electorate by 6 percentage points since just 3 years ago. So that is benefiting Newsom. And of course, we know female voters have been critical to the Newsom strategy, and you see it here. Among female voters, 62% say no to the recall. Keep Newsom in office. Only 38% say yes, Jake.
All right, David Chalian, thanks so much. And Dana Bash, I mean, first of all, if these numbers hold, these exit poll numbers hold, a big night, a good night for Governor Newsom, a good night for the Democrats.
That's exactly right. And they're hoping, and the people I talked to in the Newsom camp and more broadly among Democratic strategists, that it is going to be decisive at the end of the day. It's going to potentially be a while until we get the total vote. But that is really critical for them if in the idea of making a point. And the point being that they want to make is that this was Republican overreach, but much more importantly, they are trying to take what will happen, they hope, in California national, which is if you Republicans follow the Trump playbook, maybe you will do well in primaries, maybe you will do well with the base, but it's not going to serve you well with the larger electorate. California is different from other states. But of course, but
the lesson can be applied.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but because if you look at what's happened here, I mean, the only person that really sort of emerged was Larry Elder. And that could be a problem. If this happens in other states, you think about a state like Georgia, for instance, Herschel Walker possibly on the ballot there. So something I think that's also interesting when you think about what's happening here, the Latino numbers. The Gavin Newsom campaign, Democrats more generally very worried about whether or not they would show up. They tend to be younger than average voters and a lot of drop-off in non-presidential elections. But these numbers look good. You know, you talk to some folks on the ground there early on, Latinos weren't so jazzed about Gavin Newsom, you know, after he won in 2018. So I think that's a good sign for Newsom.
The one thing I do think, though, is if we're going to characterize what the campaigns are likely feeling now, I mean, certainly for Democrats here in Washington, I mean, this is a sigh of relief because, again, he was in some danger earlier this summer. They had to engage people that they hadn't necessarily needed earlier on in
like
the summer, like the president. Exactly. I mean, they really had to bring out all of the guns here. And he's a Democratic governor in a Democratic state who had presidential aspirations. He shouldn't have had to do that.
No, he shouldn't have had to do that. But
it was smart that he did.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right, we have a key race alert for you now. I want you to take a look. It's only 6% of the estimated vote, 6%. But with that 6% in, no, should Governor Newsom be recalled, is at 60.6% of the vote. Yes is at 39.4% of the vote. That is more than 170,000 votes ahead. That is only 6% of the vote, but these are actual votes that we're talking about. And with these actual votes, Governor Newsom is in the lead to keep his job, John King.
He is. And again, you make the key point. We're very early on, 6% of the estimated vote. All of them so far down here in San Diego County. So let's just bring it up. Percentages don't change, of course, because it's all the same. So 60% so far, 61% if you round up, saying no, keep Gavin Newsom. We do not want to recall him. 39%, a little more and change, voting yes. Now, again, early numbers, and we do know that the first numbers we're going to see tonight, first in San Diego right here, and we'll get some others momentarily, maybe even by the time I come back to the statewide map. These are mail-in ballots, early ballots, and we expect, just like we had in November, Democrats voting disproportionately. So let's watch and see if this holds up. If it does, it's a very good sign for Gavin Newsom. You mentioned the early indications are. Why so? Because San Diego has had Republican mayors. A former San Diego mayor is one of the Republican candidates on the ballot. But San Diego and the suburbs around it have been trending Democratic. This is the governor's race in 2018. Forget the numbers, just look at the margin, 57%. So if Democrats are supporting Gavin Newsom and voting no tonight by roughly, let me switch to this map here, roughly even in excess of that percentages, that tells you the Democrats are holding on. So let's just pull out and see. We're still up. We got some more votes up here. Again, this is a key area for the governor. This is Napa County. You start to get up into the Bay Area, wine country to the north. He was the former mayor of San Francisco. This is where he believes his support is strongest. Again, 68% of the estimated vote. That's just in this county. You see it's a much smaller raw numbers than down in San Diego. But again, 71% say keep Newsom. They're voting no. Back in the governor's race, he got 65%. So he's overperforming in that county, if you will, if you consider no to be Newsom on that. So we're going to have to watch as this plays out. When you switch maps, you come back to the individual candidates. We don't have those numbers yet on question 2. But 72% if you round up in Napa County. Come back down, you see no. 61% in San Diego County, a long way to go. 58 counties in California, preliminary results in both Napa and San Diego. But the early count tells you that what the Newsom campaign was predicting, at least in the first numbers, is proving true.
It's very early, but we should note, as you did, that San Diego does have a history of electing Republicans to the mayor's office. And I believe that the Elder campaign and Republicans were hoping for a big turnout in the suburbs of San Diego.
Yes, and they're also hoping, I want to use the 2018 governor's race map for just a second. Remember, 2018 governor's race map. This is not tonight. But remember, California has evolved and become more and more Democratic. But those people who've become Democrats or become independents and voting for Democrats, they used to be Republicans. So to your point, that's exactly why. If you look, 57%, the Elder campaign, and even just the yes forces, forget the other candidates, just those wanting yes, recall Gavin Newsom, say, we know there's a history down here, at least, of Republicans, so maybe they turn on the Democratic governor. Even voters who maybe voted for Newsom in 2018 say, you know what, didn't work out the way I wanted to, they would vote yes. So the key test, San Diego, this is the second largest county in the state. It's much smaller than Los Angeles, but this is number 2. If there is going to be a groundswell for yes, it has to come math. Raw math is politics, where the people live. So you need big numbers in a place like this. The early indications are you're not getting them. And then Orange County is another one. Stephanie Elam was there earlier in Huntington Beach. You saw the long lines. Republicans traditionally turn out on Election Day. So let's wait and let's count votes. But it would have to be overwhelming. Yes and no cannot split Orange County like they did Democrat-Republican back in 2018. So when you come back to 2021 and you look at question 1, which is yes or no, let's come back out. We have some votes now in Orange County. Look at that. You stay here long enough, we'll get new votes. So here you have it. Again, Orange County, if Gavin Newsom is ahead by that, if no, keep Newsom is ahead by that at the end of the night, it's a blowout. Forget about it. So let's just pull out and see if we have any more coming in. So right now we have Napa, we have Orange, and we have San Diego. You expect no to carry this, meaning keep Newsom in office, no to the recall by a big margin. If those stay blue, game over.
So Orange County, let's go back to Orange County, because I think probably some of our viewers are aware that Orange County historically has been a Republican stronghold, although it has shifted in recent years. I think the Nixon Library is in Orange County. Larry Elder, or the Republicans in general, need, this is early vote, but still, they need much better than this in Orange County. I mean, yes is losing, but it's not even particularly close.
Most, yeah, again, and here's the third largest, right? So Los Angeles is the largest county. So then you go to San Diego, and then you come to Orange. If there is going to be a no, then you're absolutely right. As I said earlier, you need every Republican, and then you need Democrats and independents, enough of them who voted for Newsom, either to vote yes or enough of them to stay home so that those recall votes rack up, if you will. If the margin is like that, it's just not going to happen. There's just no way.
You don't have to sing the song, but take me to Ventura County if you could.
I'm going to take you right out here to Ventura County.
Because I was told we were getting some votes.
And again, there it is, right there. Everything that Newsom needs to come in blue, meaning Newsom needs to come in no, so far is coming in no, and it's coming in by pretty lopsided margins. Now let's look. This Ventura County, you're just to the north of LA, if you will, for those of you who know. Let's just go back and look at the margins. Again, he's no, meaning keep Newsom in power. No is a vote for Newsom. and that no is getting a higher percentage right now than it did back in 7-18. Those are the candidates. We're starting to get those results. I don't want to focus on those right now because the main dynamic for us early on is in the yes or no question, what is going to happen. And so here you go here. You're starting to see them fill in. You see down here around San Jose as well. Let's look at the one where we have our first yes. Our first of California's 58 counties where at least the early votes are coming in yes. But again, this is the 48th of the 58 counties in terms of population. So it is very important for recall supporters for this to be read. Just in terms of the raw math, it doesn't do much for you because if you pull out and look at the raw math, here you are, statewide.
John, let me interrupt for 1 second. I want to go to Nick Watt right now, who is in Los Angeles. Nick, what are you seeing?
Hey, Jake. Well, we just got the results of the mail-in ballots here in Los Angeles County, and no is 76%, yes is 23%. Now, there were more than 1.8 million mail-in ballots here in Los Angeles that were already sent in, have already been counted, and that is a big margin for Newsom. Now, back in 2018, when Newsom won the governorship, he got 72% in Los Angeles. He has got 76% of mail-in ballots so far here in LA saying Newsom should remain as governor. Now, this is, of course, the most populous county in the country and also in California. 25% of the state's voters are here. This is not necessarily an unexpected result, possibly above expectation from here in Los Angeles so far.
Nick, can you give us the raw vote totals from where you are, if you have them?
Yes, I can. So no is 1,414,354. Yes is 438,810. That is what we have so far from those mail-in ballots. Of course, the ballot boxes are going to start coming into this room behind me via helicopter, via boats from Catalina Island, and this is where they will be counting all the votes from here in Los Angeles County.
So just again, for people at home who are trying to keep track, this is the most populous county in all of California. These are the mail-in ballots, and you're saying the votes to keep Governor Newsom are, give it again, the raw total?
Okay, so raw total, 76% say they want to keep Newsom. That is 1,414,354. To get rid of Newsom, 23.6%. That's 438,810. That is from the mail-in ballots so far, which are about a third of all the registered voters here in Los Angeles County. So that's a big chunk. But listen, you know, more than half of the registered voters in LA County are Democrats. You know, normally in the last couple of election cycles, we've seen the Democrats perform in LA about 10 points above where they are in the rest of the state. As I say, you know, Newsom got 72% in LA County when he won the election last time. He got 76% now saying that they want him to stay.
All right, Nick, thanks so much. And John, I mean, that's almost a 1 million vote deficit between keep Newsom and get rid of him.
Right. The last thing America needs to see is my scribble again, but we went through this some in November. It just helps.
Those are numbers, though, for people to...
Yes, these are numbers. Look, this is why it's great to have our reporters on the scene, to get some of these results even before they're officially released or posted on the state website. So what do they tell you? Number one, again, a word of caution. Remember back in November 2020, I don't want to keep doing this, but just to be careful. I just want everyone to be careful, especially when you have campaigns recklessly saying that this is a rigged system, they're fraud. But remember back in November where Joe Biden was ahead in Ohio and was ahead in Texas for a while. Donald Trump was ahead in Pennsylvania for a while. We need to wait and get all of the votes. These are not all of the votes. However,
these are the early votes.
These are the early
disproportionately Democratic.
Right. But we do know, yes, they're early and yes, they're disproportionately Democrats, but we do know that the Newsom campaign and even those who favor the recall would concede this is what he needs. And this is what he's getting. If these numbers hold up, I'm going to blank the numbers just so I can come out and take a closer look at the whole state now as more of them come in. As you see, it's starting to fill in. I don't even need to go into these individual counties to tell you, I would have told you yesterday or a month ago, these counties would be red, saying recall the governor. The challenge for Newsom is here, especially down here. If Orange and San Diego and then up the coast And then up here, which we know will be blue, I'm just going to tap right here. Let's go into Santa Clara County. Again, this is San Jose. There's some disenchantment with the COVID restrictions down here, without a doubt. There are Democrats and independents here who signed petitions saying, put the recall election on the ballot. Keeping the governor is getting 78% in Santa Clara County right now. The governor got 71% when he ran for re-election. Ran for election 3 years ago. Again, you have to do the steps here. I don't mean to confuse people, but again, these are the early ballots. But the early ballots tell us that right now there is everything on this map to support what the Newsom campaign has been saying about Democratic participation, and nothing on this map in the early numbers, we'll keep counting them, but nothing to suggest that yes, at the moment, has a prayer.
All right, numbers still coming in. Governor Newsom getting an early lead tonight with no ahead right now in raw votes. Several big counties are still waiting to report the results, and we're going to have those for you when we come back. Stay with us. And we have a key race alert for you as more and more of the raw votes come in. And look, should Governor Newsom be recalled? No, 67%. That's with 52% of the vote in. Most of the vote is in. 67% say no, 33% about say yes. The no side, the keep Governor Newsom side, is up by more than 2.3 million votes. 2.3 million votes as of right now. Now, there's still 48% of the vote to come in, John King. But as of right now, if I were Governor Newsom, I would be feeling pretty good.
You would be thinking, number one, you're going to get to complete your term. And number two, Governor Newsom made this campaign in the end about Larry Elder, but also about the comparison, California versus, say, Florida and Texas on COVID. If your keep Newsom number stays anywhere close to that, the governor is going to think that it's a mandate by the people of California to continue those policies, which will be a national debate heading into the 2022 midterms, may well be a debate in Virginia, just across the Potomac River, which have a governor's race this year. So careful, don't overread what happens in California with a national message, but also don't underread it. In the next few days, when we get final results, and we're not there yet, it'll be interesting to talk about this. But look at this. With about half of the vote in, he is at 71% if you round up. Turnout. This was the challenge for Democrats. Democrats traditionally in off-year elections, this is a quirky off-year recall, but Democrats in midterms often have a hard time turning out their coalition. It looks as if the Newsom campaign, and again, they had to spend a lot of money to do this. They got panicked, which is why they did this. But it looks like once the alarms went off so far that they've done what they needed to do. Now you're looking at this map fill in, and you see a lot of blue. We're going to get red, which is yes. Red is yes, recall the governor. We will get more in these counties out here. The problem is they're not very populous. Los Angeles, the most populous county in the state, an overwhelming no. We want to keep our governor. 76% and counting. Again, 59%. Let's wait. We will get more votes on Election Day votes. The recall forces say their numbers will improve as we get votes later. But that is an overwhelming start in, again, this is 26% of the state population.
And just to underline that point, because it's such a good point, John, we have here almost a million vote chasm in favor of Governor Newsom in Los Angeles. So it's 76. Go to a red county just to show people how difficult it is to make it up when you're talking about the numbers of people.
So you come in here, this is in the middle of the state, 32nd, Ventura County, the 32nd most populous county of the 58, right? And so yes is getting 56%, but look, it's 15,000 votes to 12,000 votes. So you're talking, 3,000 votes and change here. This is why, politics is about math in the end, and politics in the end is about running it up where the people live. So the challenge for the yes forces was to change the last 15, even 20 years of dynamics in California, which is down here. These used to be strong Republican areas. Right now, Gavin Newsom is not only winning Orange County, keep Newsom is winning Orange County by more than Gavin Newsom won Orange County 3 years ago, 58% right now. Again, we believe that's about 64% of the estimated vote. If that margin holds up, it's a blowout. Again, we have to count the Election Day votes. But for the recall Newsom forces to succeed, most Republicans and smart numbers counters, anybody in California would say this needs to be red. This would need to be yes for Newsom. And then that's the third largest county. Just one more again. San Diego, you come down here, it's the second largest county, a lot smaller than Los Angeles, but you got to get votes where the people are. Again, keep Newsom, 61% right now when you round up in San Diego County. And when you pull out just to the map, so you say, okay, you're getting some red in here. I just want to remind people, if you are for recalling the governor, this is great. You're getting 82% in Lassen County, but it's the 47th. It's 0.1% of the state population. It's 5,500 votes and 1,200 votes. You can't win an election if your 5,500 votes are going up against those 1.4 million votes.
It's not the land that votes. It's the people. Riverside County came in, I think, John, if you want to.
We go around in California here. Well, let's go all the way out. Let's come down the coast as we go. Santa Barbara County, there, right there. The Reagan Library, Santa Barbara County, am I right? 67% there. Again, this is a Democratic area, has been trending that way for some time, but Republicans used to be a lot more competitive, right? Keep Newsom there. We come down here, Ventura County. We looked at that before. We go to Los Angeles County. Now we can come out here to Riverside County. This is the 4th largest county in the state. Again, if you're trying to upset the apple cart, if you're trying to change the last 20 years of politics in California, this can be competitive. That's, so you see 10 points there,
sure.
9-point margin there. But again, if you go back to 2018, it was almost tied, right? The Republican candidate won Riverside County in 2018, right? Won it narrowly, but at least won, right? So now you come forward to where we are now, and you look at it here, and the keep Newsom forces are ahead. Again, we have to count more. If you accept the theory that Republicans vote on Election Day, these numbers might change. That's relatively close, but that's not good enough.
Right.
This cannot be close. For yes to win, that can't be close.
Another place where Republicans were hoping to do well, San Bernardino County. How is it looking there?
San Bernardino, I have to hunt for that one. You got me there. We come up here. We go up one more up for San Bernardino. Again, 58% here. And again, this is the 5th largest county. So we're going to go through these, right? We can go through from 1 to 10, and then we can go on to the other 48. But San Bernardino, you have 58% right now. You go back in the governor's race here. Again, keep Gavin Newsom, meaning no, right now is outperforming the first Gavin Newsom election. San Bernardino, 5th most populous. It's 5.5%, 6% of the population. So that's 2018. This is 2021. And again, it's the math. That's almost a 50,000 vote difference right there. Those 50,000 votes for no just overwhelm so far what we're seeing in the smaller counties where we're getting the yes.
But the votes, of course, still coming in. Governor Newsom is holding on to a rather significant lead. Most voters so far saying no to the recall. We are standing by for more results from key counties. Stay with us. We have another key race alert for you. Look at the vote coming in. 59% of the vote in for the California recall. And no, in other words, keep Governor Newsom is at 68% with more than 5 million votes. Those who want to dump Newsom have 32% of the vote. Newsom right now has a 2.7 million vote advantage. 2.7 million. Now we're still waiting for roughly 40% of the vote to come in, but 2.7 million votes right now, and Newsom in the lead. That's a big chasm.
That's a shellacking in progress unless it changes dramatically. No means keep your governor, 68%. Yes means recall your governor, 32%, and you noted 5.1 to 2.4 million. It's just enormous. Now again, to be careful, we count all the votes, and some votes will come in later, and the numbers may change. The problem, we've been through this before in any election, these are not candidates, this is yes or no, but you pull out to that big of a lead, it is really hard to close a gap of just under 3 million votes. And so 2.765 million votes. So what's happening here in the map? Number one, again, politics matters most where the people live most, not to offend people in small counties, but the math is where the people live. So if you're looking right now, all of the large counties are filling in blue, meaning no, keep the governor. Back in 2018, the California Republican Party has been in tough straits for a long time. Two counties back in 2018. We just talked about Riverside a minute ago. The Republicans carried it in 2018, just barely, but they did carry it back in the 2018 race for governor. And Fresno County here in the middle, again, very competitive race, but the Republicans were in play in Fresno County. You have had a 15-year, even longer, California Republicans will tell you, problem for the California Republican Party. Some would argue it was exacerbated under Trump, but now you come forward, that's the elder vote. We'll come back to that in a minute. But if you come back to the results on the yes or no, the fundamental question, who's winning on question 2 doesn't matter. If that stays at 68%, it could matter for the future, but it won't matter tonight or who's the next governor. 68%. I just showed you Riverside County. It's more competitive than Los Angeles or San Francisco, but no, keep the governor is winning in a county the Republicans carried against Newsom for 3 years ago. And if you come up here to Fresno, again, more competitive than many, but this at the moment, map is filling in a way that I would say even exceeds what the no forces could have assumed. Again, you're seeing the red right here. The problem, Jake, is the red is yes, much smaller. The 18th largest county, 18th of the 58. You come over here, the 33rd, Kings County, it's a great name, of the counties, of the 58. So the no forces are filling in the reliably Republican areas, but the math is just overwhelming, especially you just come up the coast. Monterey County, it's the 20th, it's 72%. You're seeing this all up the coast, 68, 68, 69, 70. You come into San Francisco, which is the governor's base.
Look at that.
80, 88.
So, John, obviously this is not 2003 when Arnold Schwarzenegger handily defeated then incumbent Democratic Governor Gray Davis. And there are more Democrats and fewer Republicans in the state. But California is still a state where Republicans can win. Maybe not statewide as easily, but congressional districts.
Sure.
Last fall, when Joe Biden was winning the state handily, there were 2 House races where Republicans, both Asian American women, Young Kim and Michelle Steele, won. So people voted for Joe Biden for president and then also voted for a Republican for Congress. Tell us about those congressional districts.
Right. Those are both right down here. And so this is the Republican balance of power. Democrats, again, it's an overwhelmingly blue state. So you have 42 to 11. Those seats flipped right down in here. You can come down in here. You see this is the Young Kim beats Gil Cisneros in this case. Again, a very close election. Look how close this is, right? A very, very close election. So just remember where this is on the map, and we come out, right? So here we are, down here, and now you come back to question 1 today in 2021. It's all blue, where all of those congressional races were. Now, we're getting county results right now. We don't have congressional CD results. We'll get those in the days ahead as you break down things more granular. But you're talking about, right down in here as you come down through Orange. Again, Orange County is a place where the Republican Party keeps fighting back and forth, but it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming, 58% here. 58% here. Then you get into the 70s when you come into Los Angeles County. So it's south of Los Angeles. In Orange County, on your way down to San Diego, is where you still have a bit of a tug-of-war when you look at the congressional level as you come down in here. But it's just in statewide elections, this is where the California Republican Party has been in decline, back to the days of Pete Wilson. You mentioned the Schwarzenegger race. What's interesting about this, if you think about it, is that Larry Elder in some ways became more of an issue in this race than Schwarzenegger did back then, even though he was the action hero, even though he was a globally known celebrity. Schwarzenegger was very disciplined in making the campaign, not about his policy positions, but about let's clean house.
Right.
Let's clean house. We just need to clean house in Sacramento. Then we'll deal with what comes
So
next.
let me ask you, because the Republican Party in California has been struggling. Schwarzenegger was the greatest thing to happen to the Republican Party in California for a long time, until, of course, then he became an independent.
He's the last statewide elected Republican in California.
So here's my question.
He had a state treasurer at the same time.
You gave us a little glimmer of this, but it does not look as though the pro-recall, the get rid of Newsom forces are going to win. But of the people who voted to do that, who did they like?
Who did they like? Sure, let's take a look at that. If you want to take a look at the question. And so here becomes a question, right? That's red everywhere. That's Larry Elder. Of question 2, and please, question 1 is what matters. Yes or no, do you keep your governor? If no carries the day, this has no meaning, as in nobody here gets elected. The question is, though Larry Elder did emerge as the leading Republican candidate, does he take something out of this, Jake, to say, maybe it didn't go my way tonight, but does he think he can entertain a run again? That'll be a question for tomorrow. Let's first finish the vote count tonight.
All right, John, thanks so much. We can now make a major projection. CNN projects that California's Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, defeats the recall and will serve out the year-plus left on his term. Newsom turning back opposition that gained traction earlier in the pandemic, dodging what would have been a serious blow to his party and his career in one of the nation's biggest and bluest states. Again, CNN projects that Democrat Gavin Newsom, the incumbent governor, defeats the recall and will remain governor of California. Dana Bash, this is a much earlier night than we thought. It is a good night for the Democrats, a good night for Gavin Newsom.
Absolutely. Look, a recall is by definition a referendum on the governor. And what the governor's aides are saying that they really feel that they did right is make this not a referendum on him, but a referendum on what would happen if he's not there. What would happen if a Trump Republican took over? What would happen to people with their lives with regard to social issues and, most importantly, COVID? And they had Larry Elder, the leading Republican, as a foil, and also governors, Republican governors of other states for Gavin Newsom to point to say, do you want California to end up like Florida or Texas with regard to mask mandates, not allowing them, or even not even pushing vaccines?
Yeah, no doubt about it. A good night for Democrats. They ran a Democratic playbook in a Democratic state and won. Still some warning signs, I think, for Democrats. There is so much unease in the country around COVID still, around the economy, around climate change. And Gavin Newsom has to govern, and Democrats have to govern, and they have to prove that they can solve these problems. I think that is the big test, right? I mean, he didn't run on his record. He ran against Trumpism. He ran against Elder. He ran against DeSantis. Can he fix the homeless problem in California, which is such a big issue for so many people? So I think that's still the question for Democrats. What is their message about their party and their record of accomplishment?
And Casey, let me ask you, I've seen it said in the last week by Democratic aides, and I wonder if you agree, that the best thing that happened to Gavin Newsom was Larry Elder shooting to the top of the polls for the alternative. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've had both Democrats and Republicans say that to me over the course of the last day. I mean, I spoke to some of the strategists for some of the rival Republican campaigns in California, too, and they said, Larry Elder was the best thing that ever happened to Gavin Newsom. And, I do think the one thing, big picture, and as John is always so careful to point out, these numbers aren't final, obviously, but the margin that we're seeing early in the night is huge for Gavin Newsom. It's bigger than, many people expected, certainly than many of my sources expected it to be. And I think that shows you that Democrats are still really engaged, or that you can engage them. They haven't tuned out of the news after 4 years of Donald Trump. They are still afraid of that kind of governance coming back, of living that way again, and that there is a way to activate that instinct. Because, of course, sometimes, when you win elections, your voters sit back, they say everything's fine, nothing to worry about, I don't need to get engaged, I don't need to get to the polls. That didn't happen here today.
And Dana, some of the policy positions that were part of Larry Elder's decades-long time in radio, doing talk radio, being provocative, which is the job of somebody in talk radio, but not necessarily appealing to voters, especially not in California, opposing a minimum wage, opposing maternity leave, opposing legal abortion, and as you noted during the COVID pandemic, he was not anti-vaccine, but certainly did not seem like somebody
he
who
said
would,
he got it, but he didn't.
Yeah, he would not impose vaccine mandates as Governor Newsom has. For instance, on healthcare workers and teachers, somebody who is against masking in schools, somebody who has voiced opposition to kids getting vaccinated.
Exactly.
This is not a state that wanted to hear that message.
And that is one of the questions that we are going to see being asked, and that will be a test that states across the country are going to be looking at. And that is about the Republican Party. I mean, yes, in 2003, Arnold Schwarzenegger won for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that he was one of the biggest movie stars in the world, but also because he wasn't a sort of base conservative, because that doesn't work in doesn't work in California, but it wouldn't necessarily work in even a purpley state. And so when you see that there were other Republicans on the ballot, like the mayor of San Diego, who are maybe more fitting for a place like California, and they didn't stand a chance because that's not where the Republican Party is. It is a warning sign for Republicans when you look at their national ability.
Well, and let's to pick up on your point about the Republican Party, too. I mean, this is the second election that we've had after the 2020 presidential, right? We had those elections in Georgia where you had candidates coming out and saying, don't trust the system, your vote's not going to be counted. Now, before this election, we had Larry Elder already starting to say, your vote's not going to be counted, there's already fraud. And I was talking to one California Republican. I mean, I think, we've all covered the fact that California Republicans have actually been voting by mail for years, decades even, in a way that had them extraordinarily comfortable with the system. And now all of a sudden these doubts have been sown. And, I think Republicans also think that that really hurt hurt them potentially and maybe part of the margin here as well. And if you think about how that applies across the map, I mean, it's potentially a real problem for Republicans. And America, obviously, but also for the party.
No, and I think we'll see that in other races. You think about the Virginia governor's race there, the way in which Terry McAuliffe is trying to paint the challenger there, Glenn Youngkin, as a Trumpist, essentially. And I think, that's going to be the big question. How potent is Trump and Trumpism in 2022? We saw here that running against Trumpism was very easy in a Democratic state. We'll see how that plays out in these House races and these other governor's races and Senate races as well.
Very different dynamic.
All right, Anderson?
Yeah, Jake, we are waiting to hear from Governor Gavin Newsom. Obviously, we'll bring those comments to you live. Rob, what lessons are clear at this point?
California is behaving politically the way it's drawn. The math is coming through. I do caution that this is a blowout, and those numbers probably shrink. We know from last year's all vote by mail election, Republicans are going to vote late, maybe even vote in person today. But it's clear. It's why we've made the call. It's going to be a big blue victory in a blue state tonight.
What do you expect to hear from Newsom tonight? I mean, it doesn't seem like there's. I mean, how celebratory would it be?
Well, I'm sure he's being cautioned not to celebrate. He's not exactly known for introspection, though. So I still think you'll see a rather a brash acceptance speech, or a victory speech, I guess, suppose it is. But he'll be well served. There's not a party. It's just going to be a speech. He'll be well served to move on quickly and get back to doing the work of the people.
Look, I think he's been humbled by this experience. Your successes give you your confidence. Your setbacks give you your character. He was looking down the barrel of his career being over, and he had to find something in himself, and you saw that with him. He found a deeper passion. He connected with the grassroots. I think you're going to see something good from him tonight. But what I will say is tonight, it's fear times fear equals frustration. The Republicans were afraid of Gavin, not just because of COVID, but he was doing stuff on universal pre-K. He was doing a lot of progressive stuff that scared the Republicans. Then the Democrats got scared of Larry Elder. And it's not just Larry Elder. The Republican Party, the stuff on choice that they've been doing, the stuff on voting they've been doing, they're being nowhere on climate change, scared Democrats. So you had Republicans get scared of Gavin, then Democrats got scared of Larry Elder. But tonight, most Californians are frustrated because we wasted all this money and all this time, and now we're in the same mess with no progress.
So
at some point, we got to get out of the politics of fear on both sides.
$270 million. $276 million for what?
Yeah. Well, but you talk about Newsom being humbled. The fact is, it was that lack of humility that wound him up in this battle. Right. He went to a restaurant in the middle of the pandemic and defied his own guidance, and it really was the jet fuel behind the movement to recall him. And it turned out to be the most expensive meal anybody ever had. He had to spend $80 million to win this race. The state has spent $270 million, but the dessert is pretty good for him here. And people are going to look at this. I think Democrats are going to look at this and say, is this a formula? And Van, you're right. It's not just about vaccines. So that clearly worked for him here. But there is this Trump-tinged extremism. Democrats they're going into the midterms. They are going to be, I think, in a very difficult position to hold the House, perhaps to hold the Senate. And the one thing they've got going for them is Republicans. Right. And and the lesson here is Republican extremism does not sell outside the Republican Party.
This is Mitch McConnell's big concern with the primaries that lie ahead, where he's going to need candidates that aren't like Larry Elder.
Or Herschel Walker.
Or Herschel Walker, maybe the next Larry Elder. But what's playing out here tonight in California is the demonstration that a Trumpian-style candidate cannot grow the base, right? You can't expand beyond, in this case, the fringe in California, because we're already outnumbered 2-1. This is exactly why McConnell has engaged Trump.
But I think that's the real problem.
On these primaries.
But that's the real problem. We had a poll recently which said, 60% or so of Republican, self-identified Republicans see Trump as the leader of the party.
Yeah, that's the headwind.
Well, let's point out, Larry Elder's winning a landslide here.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
so the question is, as you were talking about, the impact of Donald Trump in these other elections. Terry McAuliffe in Virginia, as Nia was saying, is already saying his opponent is a Trumpy, using ads, et cetera, et cetera. And how will that play? in the midterms and around the country. And you know, let's say now, I mean, don't forget, before tonight, everyone was, the Republicans, including Donald Trump, or led by Donald Trump, were saying, does anyone believe this election is not going to be rigged?
Right.
So what do they do now? What do they do now?
Well, and this is a deeper question in that there's this anti-democratic tendency that's just getting more and more a home in the Republican Party. This recall election is a last gasp attempt of the Republican Party that is the third or fourth party. They may be smaller than the Green Party at this point, and yet they're willing to try to overturn the election. They could have waited a year. They didn't. So again, you have at the national level the big lie. You have, you know, this refusal to even look at January 6th. And then at the state level, you don't just have recall elections going against Gavin. You have local recall elections. This is now the tactic of the Republican Party is to do recall ambushes on people they can't defeat in a normal way. That's not good for the Republican Party.
It's not good for the country. But here's the reality for Republicans. In most places, to win primaries, you have to play Trump. To win general elections in any swing district or state, you don't want to be there. And that is a fundamental problem that Republicans have to solve.
Yeah, we expect to hear from Governor Newsom at any moment about his victory tonight. Stay with us.
Well, good evening. Here's we are enjoying an overwhelmingly no vote tonight here in the state of California. But no is not the only thing that was expressed tonight. I want to focus on what we said yes to as a state. We said yes to science. We said yes to vaccines. We said yes to ending this pandemic. We said yes to people's right to vote without fear of fake fraud or voter suppression. We said yes to women's fundamental constitutional right to decide for herself what she does with her body, her fate and future. We said yes to diversity. We said yes to inclusion. We said yes to pluralism. We said yes to all those things that we hold dear as Californians, and I would argue as Americans: economic justice, social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, our values where California's made so much progress. All of those things were on the ballot this evening. And so I'm humbled and grateful to the millions and millions of Californians that exercised their fundamental right to vote and express themselves so overwhelmingly by rejecting the division, by rejecting the cynicism, by rejecting so much of the negativity that's defined our politics in this country over the course of so many years. I just think of our kids watching all of this. Nightly news, day in and day out. And I just wonder, I've got 4 young kids. Oldest about to turn 12 this weekend. And what they're growing up to. In a world where we're so divided, these kids increasingly fearful, isolated, disconnected. And we're teaching them that. And it doesn't have to be that way. I think we owe our kids a deeper sense of respect, and all of us as adults a responsibility to disregard this false separateness. We're so much more in common as a state and a nation than we give ourselves credit for. I've been all over the state of California over the last many years, but notably the last 9 months. Conservative parts of the state, progressive parts of the state, folks that I know were going to vote no, and votes that I knew were going to vote yes on this recall, and turned out to do just that. But one thing that's universal, everybody wants to be respected. Everyone wants to feel some connection to one another. We all certainly in this pandemic want to feel safe, protected. And those are universal values. And I think about just in the last, few days, and the former president put out saying this election was rigged. Democracy is not a football. You don't throw it around. It's more like antique vase. You could drop it and smash it in a million different pieces. And that's what we're capable of doing if we don't stand up to meet the moment and push back. I said this many, many times on the campaign trail. You know, we may have defeated Trump, but Trumpism is not dead in this country. The big lie, January 6th insurrection, all the voting suppression efforts that are happening all across this country, what's happening, the assault on fundamental rights, constitutionally protected rights of women and girls. It's a remarkable moment in our nation's history. But I'm reminded of something, I don't know, a few decades ago, someone told me when describing a difficult and challenging moment, said, the world is too small, our time is too short, and our wisdom is too limited to win fleeting victories at other people's expenses. And he went on to say, we must all triumph together. So in that spirit of recognizing and reconciling this moment and trying to understand what's going on, not just here in this state, but all across the United States of America, I just want to say this. Tonight, I'm humbled, grateful, but resolved in the spirit of my political hero, Robert Kennedy, to make more gentle the life of this world. Thank you all very much, and thank you to 40 million Americans, 40 million Californians, and thank you for rejecting this recall. Good night, everybody.
Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom speaking there in Sacramento after an overwhelming landslide of a victory. The no to the recall movement winning overwhelmingly. And Dan Abash, first of all, we should note, he's still in his first term. In about 6 months, in March, he's going to have to start doing this all over again to win a second term. But beyond that, this was a message. The speech he just gave seemed a national speech. It was not just about California. It was not just about what happened today. It was about, and to be completely candid, it sounded almost like a 2024, 2028 presidential speech.
Which is entirely possible.
Campaign speech, actually.
It's entirely possible. Yeah. And the resounding no vote that you saw there certainly helps that case if he decides to go that route. But you're exactly right. It is a national message. There is a roadmap that they are trying to build in this campaign in California with national figures. You saw the president, the vice president, key Democratic senators go out there.
Liz Warren, Barack Obama did a commercial.
Exactly. And what they're trying to do is, frankly, take advantage of the fact that the former president isn't going away. Just the opposite. He is commenting. He doesn't have his Twitter feed, but he has his email, and he is doing everything he can to stay involved and to keep his people within the Republican Party front and center. And the more he's out there, the more Democrats are trying to take advantage and to use him as a foil.
No, I think that's right. And the question is what Republicans do about it, right? I mean, they've got Larry Elder here who did horribly. Everybody thought he would going into this. And there are other candidates who will be on the ballot in these coming months and years, and possibly in 2024, Trump himself on the ballot again. So if you're Republicans, you're nervous about that. But you also know that Trump has a tremendous hold on the Republican Party. He has made them believe utter lies about 2020, and he just has a strong emotional connection to those voters. And Republicans who are running across the ballot know that. So this is, I think, a real kind of moment for Republicans to take away what does this mean for their relationship to Trumpism. And in some ways, I think they've already figured that out.
Yeah, and again, I think that the critical piece of this is the margin that we're seeing here for Newsom, because I think we knew going into the night it was most likely that this was going to be the outcome, but we didn't know it was going to be this significant. And I think the question, too, and I'm hearing, getting emails from both Republicans and Democrats, Republicans, frankly, expecting this, a lot of them. But I've had some Democrats get in touch to say that while they acknowledge there are a lot of challenges for national Democrats, whether they're related to inflation, the economy, getting the agenda through Congress, they feel pretty good about tonight because Republicans, again, are giving them so much to work with.
And in fact, it was just a few days ago that Larry Elder said that Joe Biden had been won in a fair election, and then he took it back. He had to take it back because he, too, is afraid of the base. David Chalian, we heard a very national speech just now from Gavin Newsom. Tell us what you're picking up in the exit polls and more.
Well, as you noted in his speech, that 1-2 punch you guys are talking about is now the Democratic playbook going forward, right? Lean into science, lean into vaccine mandates, lean in to management of the coronavirus, and at the same time, Trumpify the Republican Party as much as possible, which, of course, Republican voters help you do because right now Trump really is the life force inside the GOP. Those two things together, you heard it all throughout his speech. So that wasn't just California, that was nationally. But looking inside these numbers, I will also say there are some to-do items. Even with this huge Newsom victory, there are some to-do items here for the Democratic Party, especially in less blue places. You see real concern among voters when it comes to the economy and to the cost of living in your community. Inflation, as Casey was just saying, that's real. And every politician on the ballot in 2022 is going to need to deal with that, acknowledge that, and make sure they don't ignore it. That's one. And the other thing I would just note, we see some of the demographic trends, Jake, that we saw in 2020 still very much at play in this Trump, post-Trump era, which is that white college-educated voters are going more and more for Democrats. We see this in the suburbs throughout the country. This is sort of the definitional thing of American politics at the moment. And we see that here for Newsom as well. But as we also saw in 2020, Trump made some inroads among Latinos, among non-white voters overall, but among Latinos and specifically Latino men. And we see that here, too, as a warning sign or a to-do item for Democrats to work on, because Gavin Newsom had won Latino men 3 years ago in his governor's race by 22 points. That's now down to 6 points in the exit poll. So it is something to be aware of, especially when you're looking at that battle for control of the House and where that vote may play so critically in some key House races. So there are items here to pay attention to, even in a big Democratic victory for Democrats moving forward as well, Jake.
Very interesting. David Chalian, thank you so much. Anderson?
Yeah, Jake, I want to talk to Jeff Zeleny. Jeff, we were just hearing from David Chalian about how this may impact the midterms. I'm wondering what have you been hearing?
Anderson, talking to a variety of Democrats, as we have been for the last several minutes and all evening, from the White House to the House and Senate committees, there certainly is a sense of confidence and, quite frankly, a sense of relief. Had this gone the other way, had it even been a narrow race, it would have simply been disastrous. But this landslide win is probably without question, the biggest boost of confidence, politically speaking, for the Biden administration. And actually, as President Biden was coming back to the White House after, of course, spending yesterday out in California and today in Colorado, I actually asked him what lessons he can draw from this. And he said, well, it's too early. Of course, the race hasn't been called then. But on vaccines, he said, he can draw lessons. And that is what Democrats are going to do. They do believe that there is now more of a sense for vaccine mandates. Now, the president himself said not among everyone. There's going to be a small percentage that does not accept them. But that is what this is going to essentially offer a roadmap for Democrats going forward to be much more serious about COVID-19 on the mandates for mask wearing and for vaccines. But we should also point out that history is never kind to a president's party. So in closing here, Anderson, one top Democratic official I spoke to just a couple seconds ago, he said it's more of a warning sign for them than a positive message for us, but we will certainly take this tonight. So that, of course, the takeaway. Bad news for Republicans. Certainly the era of Trumpism was rejected tonight, Anderson.
Yeah, Jeff Zeleny, thanks. Let's go to our panel, Rob. What do you think is the message for Republicans?
The message is Trumpism is not the future if you want to win. It's a losing formula. It's on display here in California.
There's not a lot of Republicans, though, who seem to believe that in D.C.
There aren't. Well, the problem is not enough Republican voters believe it. So hopefully there's still lessons taken away from this. Hopefully they see that perpetuating the big lie of rigged elections is absurd on a night like tonight when the margin's going to be in the millions. There's no type of fraud going on here. We have to keep, from my perspective as a Republican that wants to move beyond Trump, we're going to have to keep confronting this, battling it, and knocking it down. And it's going to probably take more time than we want. but it is a losing, losing, losing formula.
But Donald Trump is not going anywhere. People I talked to, a couple of Republicans this past week, believe he's more likely, in fact, to run again for vengeance now than he was even at the beginning of the summer. And you look at somebody like Mitch McConnell, who is fighting for a majority, and Donald Trump is endorsing people that Mitch McConnell doesn't want or doesn't think can win or doesn't think can help the Republican Party and believes will happen in the future what happened in Georgia during the previous election. So what do Republicans do about
that?
So
if Trump contributes to fumbling the midterms, these midterms should accrue to the Republicans for sure. If there's any fumble there at all, Trump then gets, I think, he gets taken on if he wants to run for that nomination again. People like Chris Christie, who I think may be able to do it, are really starting to learn those markers. So, it's degrading, I think, by the day, the Trump effect. But of course, it hasn't gone away. But nights like tonight hopefully continue to degrade it for the sake of the country, absolutely. But as a Republican, hopefully it degrades it so we can get back to opportunities to advance forward and win and broaden our coalition of voters in this country.
Yeah. The dynamic, though, is the one that you can't win unless you get nominated. And Republicans in most places can't get nominated if they're seen as anti-Trump.
That's right.
And that is the fundamental problem that they face. Jeff is right. I agreed with the comment of the last the Democrat he mentioned. This was more a warning sign for Republicans than necessarily, a sign of great encouragement for Democrats. There are these historical barriers, and it's a redistricting year in which Republicans are going to benefit from redistricting. Democrats really start behind in the race for the House, and so much is reliant on what happens, what course this virus takes, what course the economy takes. The president may score some big victories this fall. That could help him. But the real lesson here is don't make it a referendum on the president. Don't play defense. You got to play offense. And Trump gives them the opportunity to play offense.
Let me just, I think the one thing to say is I'm proud of Gavin Newsom. Like this is his night. He had a tough hand. He was going down. He was in the toilet starting to swirl. And he figured out a way to get out of that situation. And I thought the guy you saw tonight was a guy you could respect. This is a guy that's had biblical level tragedies befall that state.
Yeah.
Wildfires, droughts, a plague, pandemic, a recall election.
Yeah.
And he was able to stand there and talk about not just himself, talk about the state, talk about the issues, talk about his kids, and walk away a winner tonight.
Yeah.
That's tough to pull off. And when you see somebody pull something like that off, on the national stage, I think you got to give him.
Well, you're a statesman. I'm an old hack. Let me just say, they also ran a great campaign, and I admire the campaign they ran. It was smart. As I said, they grabbed the definition of the race. They defined what the stakes were about, and they made the pandemic and Trumpism and Elder the focus of that race, and that's why they won this big victory. And it was very smart and very well done.
Well, they were very agile at the beginning, and they said, just vote no. Let's get rid of the rest of the Democrats. So let's make this a simple proposition here. Just vote no. And then COVID was obviously a problem for him at one point, but then when the Delta variant came and people started feeling unsafe, they understood that the mandates might be important.
Right.
And then when Elder rose to the top of the pack, that sort of
an opponent of mandates, an opponent of requirements. Right. And, in that whole mix is everybody's watching the news from Florida, the news from Texas, and ask themselves, 2/3 of the voters today, according to this exit poll, either said that the measures that Newsom has implemented were about right or not strict enough.
Right.
Well, those not strict enough people did not vote for a recall.
So they could nationalize the election.
Right.
About science, about vaccines, but
Elder's the key to this.
Make it about Elder.
Elder was the key to this. Because early on in the campaign, the Newsom team tried to run against Trump and Trumpism. First ad showed scenes of the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, and they tried to equate the recall to the storming of the Capitol, and it didn't work. It wasn't believable. So this thing was in a vacuum, and it was close. Gavin Newsom, yes, no, and then along came Larry Elder. So I agree, they have executed an excellent campaign from the point Elder came into the race. He almost didn't make the ballot. He wasn't going to be led on, and the judge put him on the ballot. That, case of wine to that judge from the Newsom campaign.
There's much more ahead on tonight's big win for Governor Gavin Newsom in California. Don Lemon picks up our coverage after a quick break.
All right, everybody, time now for the big show in the big studio. I'm Don Lemon. This is CNN's continuing coverage of the California recall election. This is our breaking news right now. CNN is projecting that Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom will handily defeat the recall and he's going to remain in office. So speaking just moments ago, Newsom saying that he is humbled and he is grateful, but also saying there's more than unites voters than divides them, and thanking voters and turning that recall back. So that is our breaking news right now. Let's get the big picture now. We want to go over to the Magic Wall. CNN's Phil Mattingly here. Phil, good evening to you. So we're over at the Magic Wall. Is it involves magic, or what's going on?
It magically.
There it is.
just
Magically
reappeared. Did you
appears.
just plan that? That was actually
I did.
really
I did.
impressive.
It needed me to be over here.
Smoke for the entrance too, and then do that.
So this is what it looks like?
This is what it looks like right now. Obviously, you've seen the blue fill in, you've seen the red fill in. We've been through this drill many times. Here's where things stand right now. We've obviously called this race. The no vote right now at 2.77 million more than the yes vote. Remember, this ballot had two questions. You vote no on the recall, you're done. You vote yes, then you have 46 options to replace Gavin Newsom. Clearly, Gavin Newsom and the no vote are winning handily. Here's why, and I think it's important to dig into these results here. Keep in mind the baseline. Democrats have an almost 2-to-1 advantage in registration. So for Republicans to have any shot whatsoever, they needed independents to break their way, major Democratic apathy, and you needed Republicans to surge. I want to pick out 3 counties in particular just to start things off. You start with the biggest county in the state, Los Angeles County. Obviously, Gavin Newsom, or the no vote right now, 73% to 26%. This is a blowout. However, this was an area they hoped there could be some Republican votes, or at least some apathy on the Democratic side. Look at this percentage right here. Go back to 2020. Where was Joe Biden at this point? Gavin Newsom right now doing better percentage-wise than where Joe Biden did. What Joe Biden did back in 2020. That is obviously a very positive sign. Joe Biden won this state by 30 points. Basically, the yes vote needed to blow away where Joe Biden was in terms of percentages.
Let's see tonight again, where we are. You said this is.
So right now, 73% to 26%.
Pretty much the same, but a little bit better.
No Democratic apathy, a bigger spread. Now, keep in mind, they've counted the mail vote first. Mail vote trends Democratic. These numbers will probably start to drop a little bit, but the reason why it's as big as it is right now is because there's no Democratic apathy, at least that we've seen so far. Track down to the next county over, Orange County. This used to be the Republican base in the state. That has started to shift over the course of the last several cycles, but in 2020, even though Joe Biden won this county, there were two Republican House members who won seats around this county. Where's the no vote right now? 57.9% to 42.1%. Where was Joe Biden back in 2020? Wow. 53% to 44%. So it gives you a sense right now the margins are just well in favor of where Gavin Newsom wanted to be. Track down to one more. I think this is important. Second biggest county in the state, San Diego County, obviously home of San Diego. The no vote, 60.6%. Yes vote, 39.4%. Why does this matter? Again, inside this county was a Republican-won district back in 2020. What did Joe Biden do back in 2020? Pretty much matching it up. Matching it up. If you match up in a state that Democrats won by 30 points 1 year ago, you're dead. They're matching up or doing worse almost across the board in all of the major blue, most populous areas. That, right now, is why Gavin Newsom is up by 2.77 million votes.
So when I asked Phil before the show, I said, what does California look like? And he goes, it looks like an eye, whatever. What it looks like is basically this is what was blue during 2020 is blue. Now it's red during 2020 is red.
And I'll even pull this up. Look at the counties that Joe Biden won. Take a look at this map. The counties Joe Biden won in 2020. Every single one of them, except for one, is still blue. And if you want to dig in on that county and see, all right, would this have made a difference? No, Butte County, this is the 27th largest county in the state, and it's very, very narrow. So everything that you saw in 2020, Gavin Newsom has replicated or done better than. The apathy that you wanted to see. Yes, Harry.
Yeah. Here comes Harry Hinton is here.
What a surprise. It turns out that the blue state is blue. And it turns out that the guy who had a 55% approval rating in the exit polls ends up turning back the recall. There's just like nothing really shocking to me in this. And the other thing I'll point out, though, which isn't shocking to me, is the polls all along, especially in the final week, had Newsom overwhelmingly turn back the recall. I am so sick and tired of hearing folks bash the polls over and over and over again when it was a 15-point lead for no over yes in the recall. And so far, the results tonight, if anything, illustrate that the polls might have underestimated Newsom's margin.
Why didn't you call it earlier, Harry? Because we've been talking about this all week.
Don, you and I had a conversation on the phone last night. You called me up wondering about this race, and I said basically that I might not have a job tomorrow if somehow yes was able to win in this race.
Yeah.
And so far, I'm still sitting in this chair.
Harry, you might have done that in a private phone call with Don. I didn't have that call.
You were not on that
However,
phone call, Phil.
you, Harry, did not say that publicly. You were hedging consistently throughout. And so I think that
Harry,
constantly hedged and said there was always a pathway, even if it was small. This is making very clear there was no pathway.
Well, there's no pathway anymore.
Harry, let me tell you this.
Yes, Don.
So we've been saying, oh, the polls are off and you never know 2016 or what have you. But that was the Electoral College. This is an Electoral College. This is what we said. The major point was this is the popular vote. Democrats outnumber Republicans in California, 2-1, right? And so that showed up in what happened tonight. And that you were thinking that's going to show up or happen the entire time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you look back at the polls back in 2020, what'd you find? You found that the final polls had Joe Biden winning the state of California by 29.2 points. What did he win by? I believe it was 29.2. If my memory is correct, and usually it's pretty gosh darn good. So in California, the polls right again. If anything, it underestimated the no margin, which is actually what happened in 2018, where the polls underestimated Newsom's margin. So perhaps we're seeing history.
Ron Brownstein is joining us now from California.
Yeah.
Ron, so that was our conversation last night. But how long have you and I been talking about this?
We've been talking about it for a while. I mean, look, there was always only one question in this recall, given the inherent advantages that Democrats have in the state, and that was whether Democratic voters would sleepwalk through the vote. And that was the threat that was raised by that Berkeley poll at the end of July that showed Republicans were far more engaged in the race. And as a result, among likely voters, as opposed to all voters, it appeared close at that moment. What happened after that is significant because the core problem, we talked about this last night, the core problem that the president's party faces in midterm elections is that their voters are usually less motivated to turn out than the voters that are out of the White House. And that is the problem that Newsom faced. Well, how did he solve that? He obviously solved it in a big way. He solved it by focusing not so much on what he has done, but on what Republicans might do if given power. And he centered that question on one very specific issue, the pandemic, vaccine mandates, mask mandates. And what you saw in this result in the exit poll was that given that choice, voters overwhelmingly wanted to stay the course on tougher measures. You know, Don, 32 in the exit poll, the voters who said that Newsom's policies were too strict on the recall voted on the virus, voted 92-8 to remove him from office. But they were only 1/3 of the vote. That was the same share of the vote that Trump won in 2020. The remainder of the state, roughly 62%, said either his policies were about right or not strict enough. And they gave him roughly 85% of their vote.
Ron,
so for Democrats, there's a lesson here that there may be the ability to mobilize their voters. Yes, California is unusually favorable terrain, but pointing out the contrast on the mandate on how to respond to COVID, tying Republicans not only to Trump, but to Florida and Texas, clearly was a big wake-up call for Democrats in California. And I think some Democrats are going to see it as a wake-up call for Democrats elsewhere.
Ron, Harry, let me ask you this. How much of this, this is just me, I'm not a political analyst.
Yeah.
People just weren't dialed in. There was so much consternation about, oh my gosh, Gavin Newsom, you better look out. Things are getting tighter now. You should be concerned. How much of it was just that people were not dialed in at the moment? The polling was too early. People just they weren't ready they hadn't figured it out.
Just my quick thought, among registered voters, as Harry knows, among registered voters, he was always way ahead. The only time the race was close in the polls was when people did likely voter screens and found fewer Democrats than Republicans paying attention.
One thing I would point out, Ron, which to me was very interesting, was that as soon as Elder entered the race, what you essentially saw was as Elder's vote started building in that second round that obviously never came into play, we saw at the same point the no vote also gaining steam. And it seemed to me that as soon as Elder entered, you already had, you gave Newsom this opportunity to basically say, look, it's not just necessarily a referendum on me, it's this choice. And when it becomes a choice between two candidates, all of a sudden, a state like California, the deep blue state that it is, I think that very much benefited Gavin Newsom. I think the question in my mind is whether you can really replicate that throughout the rest of the nation. Perhaps so. Perhaps maybe the coronavirus and the mandates might be able to be something that you could, say, use in other states. But I am yet convinced, because obviously this is just one contest.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Hey, Ron, I want to ask, because you talked about Joe Biden and Democrats. You believe that this was a wake-up call, and I went to grab my phone to look at some of the things that we were texting. This is a wake-up call for Democrats. What Joe Biden did with the mandates, you think it helped him, but also they saw the polling and what was happening with Gavin Newsom out in California, and they possibly realized that they needed to be stronger with the mandates for masks and for vaccines as well. So this is a message or something that maybe Democrats should be repeating around the country that they've learned from California.
Well, I think, look, I agree with Harry that you can't replicate the exact same policies in every state. Obviously, there's a different baseline. But in general, I think one of the clear messages of this is that everywhere, Democrats can lean into a tougher response to the virus than Republicans are offering in whatever state. Like in Texas, you might not argue for a statewide mandate. You would certainly argue against a statewide prohibition on local governments requiring vaccinations or masks. I think what happened here was that, as the year began, the Republicans got this on the ballot because of a backlash in the most conservative parts of the state to the stringency of what Newsom was doing, punctuated by the hypocrisy of him appearing at French Laundry. As the year went on, and particularly as the Delta variant surged, and Newsom responded with some of the most aggressive policies in the country, mask mandate in the schools, vaccine mandate for educators and healthcare workers and government employees, he was able to make that the central point of distinction in the race. When Elder got in the race, as Harry said, it gave him a foil. But, there were a lot of issues where Elder is to the right of the state that Newsom could have chosen to focus on. He chose to focus on the mandates and kind of following science and not allowing California to go down the path of Texas and Florida. And I think, if nothing else, that certainly energized Democrats. Also from the exits, it seemed to work with independent voters. And in that sense, I think it is reassuring to the president that they are kind of on strong political ground in emphasizing the, Republicans now, whether it's Kevin McCarthy, Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, their messaging is all about, quote, the rights and the choices of the 1/4 of Americans who are unvaccinated. And I think what California showed is that there is a silent majority of the vaccinated who are ready for tougher steps to get those overall numbers
You keep
up
answering every
try to
question
get
that I
those under
have for you.
control.
You keep answering it before I can even ask it.
Yeah.
This is a battle between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. We've got a lot to talk about in the hours ahead here on CNN. Stand by. This is what California looks like. Phil Mattingly is here at the wall. Everything that was blue in 2020 is blue now. Everything that's red in 2020 is red now. Pretty much.
For the most part.
Pretty much, for the most part. A lot to talk about. CNN is projecting that Gavin Newsom defeating an attempt to remove him from office. We're going to take a very quick break. More of CNN's continuing coverage of the California recall election on the other side of this. Don't go anywhere.
They have defeated Trump, but Trumpism is not dead in this country. The big lie, January 6th insurrection, all the voting suppression efforts that are happening all across this country, what's happening, the assault on fundamental rights, constitutionally protected rights of women and girls. It's a remarkable moment in our nation's history.
Welcome back, everyone. This is our breaking news. CNN is projecting that California Governor Gavin Newsom will defeat or has defeated the recall and the attempt to remove him from office. So I want to get some expert analysis. Well, I don't know expert in Bakari, but we'll bring Bakari in. Anyway, Bakari Sellers, Alice Stewart, Mark Preston, and Laura Barone Lopez in this very over-caffeinated room tonight. Speaking for myself, coffee and...
We got like 3 cups of coffee.
And soda back here. Good to see all of you back in studio. Thanks so much for joining.
Great.
I will ask you, as a conservative here, Gavin Newsom said Trumpism is not dead. Do you agree with him?
I agree with him. Trumpism is alive and well, and rumors of the death of Trumpism are greatly exaggerated. The problem is Trumpism really just works for Trump. And to some degree, Trumpism will work in a state like Arkansas or a very red state. But to think you can do that in a state like California, it's absurd. If anyone heard Harry, like we all did, California is blue. It has been blue, it is blue, and will continue to be blue for quite some time. And you cannot run a ruby red campaign in a blue state. And look, we all know that this started out as a referendum on the governor, but it became a binary choice between he and Larry Elder. And the problem is the Elder campaign didn't read the room, didn't read the state, and didn't realize you cannot run to the right of Donald Trump in a state like California, and it came back and bit him in the butt. And it bit Republicans in the butt. And I know that's something, it's a lesson to be learned. But the key is Trump might help in a Republican primary in California, but it's certainly not when you're face to face with a very Democratic
Alice,
governor.
why don't you say what you really feel next time? Hit him in the butt. I like that political analysis. Do you think Elder was the problem here? If someone else at a bet would have a better chance? I mean, look, we know he's a flamethrower. He's an internet troll. He's a talk show radio host.
Yeah, provocateur.
Provocateur. Was he the?
No. I mean, he certainly wasn't the candidate. I mean, I think the biggest problem is that Republicans weren't able to coalesce behind a more centrist Republican, somebody who would talk just about business and not about abortion, someone to talk about jobs and how we're going to get people back to work, but. There may be mandates
with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger or candidate Schwarzenegger.
Well, I mean, want to go back to Schwarzenegger. I mean, that was a race. I think that we were all we were shocked by. I mean, when he decided to run, when he got on the ballot, when he won, I think there was shock. However, he proved to be a pretty decent.
But he was likable. He wasn't a provocateur.
But here's the thing.
There was
Larry
no Donald
Elder.
Trump there.
I'm sure that most people in California didn't even know who Larry Elder was.
Right. Yeah.
And there was, 20-plus people on the ballot anyway.
What do you think? Is Trumpism is not dead? Does it work? I don't even know if you can say it because California is blue, right? Blue, blue, blue. Does Trumpism work when Trump isn't on the ballot, Laura?
I think that, to Alice's point, it can work in some places when Trump isn't on the ballot. It can work in certain congressional districts. It can work in certain Senate races in more centrist or redder states. In a state like California, no. But it also showed that, to Mark's point, that there is no moderation right now in the Republican Party when it comes to distancing from Trump or trying to go more towards the middle. That even in a state like California, the fact that they couldn't find some other candidate or coalesce around another candidate, that Trump went full in for Elder, that also before the election results even came in, they started to go with the big lie again, saying that the election was rigged and that Elder was saying that if he loses, that this means it wasn't a legitimate election. It pretends for future elections down the road, which is this going to become the norm now, where they constantly say that every election is stolen falsely.
Yeah. She said that they weren't able, there's no moderation, Bakari, but have they just hitched their wagon to him and they don't know what to do?
So the answer is yes. This is Donald Trump's party. It's going to be Donald Trump's party. I mean, there's no question about that. But I'm hesitant about taking these. I know we want to jump on TV and take these themes away and what Democrats should do and the messaging for Democrats. Just a month ago, people were telling me that Eric Adams, when he won the Democratic primary in New York, was the future of the Democratic Party. Now people are saying that the message we should take out of California is this and that. The fact is, I mean, I could have beat Larry Elder tonight. Like, that is not a difficult task in California. The Democrats
You're so
had
humble.
That was an ounce of humility.
So
just
modest.
a dash.
I think he could have beat Governor Newsom tonight as well.
Probably, but the fact is, Sean Clegg, Ace Smith, Juan Rodriguez were able to turn this election on their head, and they were able to make this a referendum not on their candidate, Gavin Newsom, but a referendum on Larry Elder, right? And the problem the Republican Party has is that they have a long list of Todd Akins and Catherine O'Donnell, but when that I'm not a witch. Christine O'Donnell.
Yeah.
Christine O'Donnell. They have a long list of these
Nice
type
memory
of.
there, Laura.
Thank you so much. They have a long list of these type of candidates. They include Larry Elder. They include Herschel Walker. The list is long, and that is what you get with Donald Trump. And Republicans have to realize one thing: Trumpism works for Donald Trump. When Donald Trump is not on the ballot, he drags down everybody else around him. And you can't swap in somebody like Larry Elder and say that we're going to be successful. Gavin Newsom, if he would have run against a Mitt Romney type of Republican, was in trouble. That there's no question about it. Gavin Newsom running against Larry Elder that they're trying to pass off as something substantive.
But how did that happen?
I think
Because it's a sprint to crazy.
No,
I mean, that's with all due respect to my Republicans, and I'm from South Carolina. I have a lot of good Republican friends. More of them are like Alice than anything else. But the Republican Party nowadays is a sprint to crazy.
But the reality is, this started off as a recall election to call attention and to hold the governor accountable for his failures with COVID and the economy and how he handled this situation.
And he went to do his laundry at the French
do his laundry at the French Laundry.
No, he went to eat at the French Laundry.
Whatever.
But the fact is, Republicans wanted to get in, and it wasn't the California Republican Party or the RNC that anointed Larry Elder. He got in and he ran and he became the top of the ticket. But there are some takeaways here, and we saw this in 2020. We saw this in the race in Georgia for the Senate.
Can you hold it on the other side of this break? Because I want to get this in, because there's someone I want to bring into the conversation. I think it's very important and can help us with that. So stand by, Allison, everybody here. So stay with us. I'm going to speak with California Secretary of State Shirley Weber after accusations of fraud by Republicans. We'll talk about that and other topics when we come right back. Don't go anywhere. Look at that gorgeous shot of Los Angeles, the LA skyline, and this gorgeous shot of our studio. We're back in studio. We're back, baby.
I've never seen traffic move so freely.
So not a lot of traffic in LA at this hour. Breaking news: CNN is projecting that California's Democratic governor Gavin Newsom easily surviving the recall election, I should say, defeating the attempt to remove him from office. So, as promised on the other side of the break, I want to bring in Shirley Weber, California's Secretary of State, who is a Democrat, and we appreciate her joining us at this late hour. No, it's not that late in California, but she has been going all day, and it's been very busy. So thank you very much for joining us, Madam Secretary. Start with this first question. Both Larry Elder and Donald Trump have claimed without any evidence that the election is rigged and that it can't be trusted. What is your message to them and to California voters tonight?
Well, I think the California voters demonstrated their faith in, hopefully, our democracy and in the voting in California itself. We've worked very hard to secure our elections. There's no evidence of fraud or mishandling of issues. And the Secretary of State, we've been very even-handed in how we've handled every issue. Even I was sued by the governor as well as by others because of some of the decisions we made that were fair and just and needed to be made in terms of ensuring that the election was fair. So I think California, I think as we look at what the results may be, we don't know yet completely, but we know how it's trending, really is a statement that they believe in the process that we had, that they believe they could vote honestly and openly and express themselves. And so I'd like to say to those who continue to challenge this issue of fairness and justness and so forth and so on, I always say to them, where's the evidence? We are willing to accept the evidence as it is, not just simply open and empty allegations of fraud and deception. Those things are easy to say, but we have yet to get the information. We have yet to get the evidence that there's been fraud and deception. So we welcome comments about our election process. We believe we're in the process of always improving what we do, but we don't chase false allegations because that's a waste of our time as we continue to build the confidence of Californians and begin to really strengthen our democracy in this country.
Well, a lot of election officials and secretaries of state have been tested throughout the past year or so in this country with these false allegations of election fraud. As a top official in the state in charge of election integrity, I know that there are so many steps involved to ensure the security of the vote. There are transaction logs that monitor the tabulation process. There's a manual tally of ballots. Ballot images are posted online to ensure transparency. Sheriff's deputies are assigned to escort ballots from each of the polling locations. So again, all these claims of rigging, are they more about making an excuse for losing than anything else?
Well, I think it is not only making an excuse for losing, but it also is a way in which you can energize people against others and divide this nation at a time when we so greatly need to be together. And it's a way in which people who feel that there's something going on when there's no evidence of that basically to organize them and to keep them organized. And they're a small base, but nonetheless, they are persistent and consistent about what they believe in and someone is feeding it. You know, we have enjoyed in this democracy the honor and dignity of former elected officials that even though we disagreed with them on political issues, they believed in this country, they believed in the vote, and they believed in keeping this democracy together. We are in an unusual time where people really want to divide us and think that that makes them important and great because they can. And I am determined as a Secretary of State in this state, the largest state in the union, to make sure that we continue to educate our children, we continue to push the issue of democracy, we continue to build on the fact that it is very unique to have a country where every vote counts, and my vote, despite being Secretary of State, is no greater than the person who comes and cleans my office's vote, that every vote counts in America. And we have to make that our motto and our legacy, and we have to strengthen it rather than constantly weaken it with false allegations. And so I stand very firmly on that, and most folks in the state know that. Because I know what it's like when you can't vote. I know what it's like when my father was denied the opportunity to vote in Arkansas for many years. So I know what it's like when you can't vote, and I also know when there's nothing to vote for. And we have to make sure that those are two things that we keep in focus always.
She just preached a word right there. I mean, those are anti-words, as we call them, right? I mean, that's a great message considering what's happening around the country. So this panel has been transfixed by your message, Secretary of State. Especially considering what we have been dealing with around the country and the suppression of votes, especially for black and brown people. We really thank you for joining us. We know it's been a very long day for you. Hopefully you can get some rest now, but I think you have a long road ahead anyways, even without doing this interview. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You be well.
Right, so we have a mission, and thank you so very much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
You do the same. Take care. Bye-bye.
So we're going to take a quick break. CNN is projecting that Governor Gavin Newsom defeats the recall. More of our continuing coverage in just a moment. She was great, right? Here is the breaking news on CNN. CNN is projecting Gavin Newsom, governor there in California, will defeat the recall. Back again with Harry Enton. Mr. Enton, what did you learn tonight?
Mask mandates were more popular than any politician. 70% of California voters in the recall said that they supported mask mandates in school. I don't care where you are in the nation. That 70% in California will transport itself to be a majority in the rest of the nation. Tough measures on COVID win. It's a good message for Democrats going forward.
And there you have it from Mr. Harry Enton. He knows all. What does Chris call you again?
The Wizard of Odds, my friend. Yeah. The Wizard of Odds.
Not a good name.
It's decent enough. Better than Harry.
All right, Harry, stand by. Stand by, Harry. Stand by. We have a panel of experts here. We're going to get to them in just minutes here on CNN. So everyone stand by. This is our breaking news. CNN is projecting that Governor Gavin Newsom is defeating the attempt to remove him from office. Much, much more straight ahead on CNN's continuing coverage of the recall election. Hello, everyone. Top of the hour. I'm Don Lemon. This is CNN's continuing coverage of the California recall election. Our breaking news tonight, CNN projects that Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom easily defeats the recall, remaining in office to finish out his term. Speaking just a short time ago, Newsom thanking Californians for voting down the recall, saying that they rejected division, they rejected negativity, but also saying that voters gave a thumbs up to science, to vaccines, and to ending the COVID pandemic. Why don't we see how this all shook out, where it is on the map? CNN's Phil Mattingly is over here. He's joining us from the Magic Wall. So, take us inside. What happened?
Let's start top line. This isn't even close. It's not even close at all. At this point in time, 65% reporting. Obviously, we've already called it for the nose. That means Gavin Newsom stays in office. Right now, the nose, 2.7 million votes ahead, 66% to 33%. Look, here's the reality when you look at this state. Joe Biden won this state by 30 points. You go back to Gavin Newsom in 2018, he won this state by 23 points. This is a Democratic state, 2-to-1 Democratic registration advantage in the state. The Republicans needed complete apathy from the Democratic Party, a surge in the very few Republican voters they had, and independents to break their way. At this point in time, it doesn't look like any of that is happening. If you want to know why, take a look at back at 2018 with Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom counties that he lost in 2018, Look at where the no vote is.
Wow.
He flipped 5 counties right here based on where things stand right now. Now, keep in mind, 65% reporting, mail-in vote was counted first. That usually leans heavily Democratic. But if you're looking at the results right now, it's pretty clear that Gavin Newsom is doing even better than he did back in 2016. Is he overperforming? Overperforming his 2018 results by more than 5%? Look at all the blue, overperforming in a number of counties around the state. So if you're looking at the numbers, still early, you're looking at the numbers, you want to know why this has been a blowout, Gavin Newsom is doing better across the board. Now, this wasn't technically a binary choice. Your ballot had 2 questions on it. Do you believe Gavin Newsom should be recalled? If you answered yes, then you got to look at 46 candidates. If you answered no, that was about it. If you want to know why the no's are winning right now, talk about that Democratic apathy. Did it actually happen? In Los Angeles County, largest county in the state, Democratic stronghold, no question about it. Gavin Newsom, 73%. The yes vote, 26%. Where was Gavin Newsom back in 2018? Doing better.
Yeah.
He's doing better than he did back in 2018. You want to tick down a little bit as well. Flip it back. This was supposed to be where Republicans might surge, could surge. Used to be a Republican stronghold. Orange County, third largest county in the state. It just trended. It trended the way the entire state has trended. In fact, I'll go ahead and pull this up. This is actually really interesting. Look at California Republican voters over the course of the last 20 or so years. 1996, 36% of registered voters in the state, Republican voters. Where are they now? 24% in the state. Those are the odds that they were dealing with when they actually started this process. So you go back into Orange County, used to be a Republican stronghold, and yet in 2020, when Joe Biden won these congressional districts in this area, Republicans actually flipped a couple seats in this area. So perhaps this was an opening here. Well, 56% to 43%. Where was Gavin Newsom back in 2018? Doing better than he did back in 2018. Where was Joe Biden in 2020? Doing better than Joe Biden did in 2020. Again, there's still a lot of vote to come in. You expect in-person voting to lean towards Republican. That could end up changing things. But Don, it's just kind of a good example. You can go county by county. You can compare to 2018. You can compare to 2020. The way things have come in so far, and the reason why Gavin Newsom is up by 2.7 million votes in a very, very Democratic state is he's overperforming what Democrats have done the last several cycles.
Yeah, listen, it's not personal. I had to leave you over there at the magic wall because I got to bring someone else in. All right, we'll see you, Phil. Thank you very much. Let's dig deeper on the results here. Robert Reich, former labor secretary under President Bill Clinton, joins us now. Mr. Reich, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us this evening or morning. You're in Berkeley, so it's still evening there. Thank you so much. How you doing?
Don, it's good to see you. We're breathing a sigh of relief out here because, you know, it was not all that evident. I think there was a lot of concern that Democrats would get complacent and assume that because there's so many Democrats out here that there would be no contest and therefore not even bother to vote, while Republicans, although fewer in number, they were fired up. And that was really a potential danger.
Well, let me ask you, I want to know what your takeaway is on all of this, because if you look at Phil, he overperformed. There was a lot of consternation about, oh my gosh, this race is tightening. Gavin Newsom could actually be recalled. Can you imagine if Larry Elder becomes the governor of California? Was that all of that overwrought? Like, what was that? What happened?
Well, it's easy to say in retrospect it was overwrought, and I think that there was a lot of panic, certainly in the last few weeks. A lot of Democrats did rally finally, but there was a potential danger here. I think what really helped Gavin Newsom, 2 things. One, he was for masks, particularly masking in schools. The leading Republican contender, Larry Elder, was against it. And also Donald Trump, although not on the ballot. This was a repudiation of Trump because President Biden was out here yesterday saying, look, either you vote for Gavin Newsom and you vote no against recall, you stick with Gavin Newsom, or you're going to get Donald Trump, because the major leading Republican, Larry Elder, is kind of a Trump clone. Larry Elder believes the big lie that the 2020 election was fraudulent.
Yeah. You know, Mr. Rice, this runoff turned out to be a big waste of time and money for the state of California. Will Republicans pay a price for that with voters?
Well, I hope so. But again, you know, the state is overwhelmingly Democratic. So the question is whether there is a kind of ricochet effect of what happened in California around the country. I think the lesson here for Democrats is that Donald Trump still plays well as a foil. That is, a repudiation of Donald Trump in Democratic states, in blue states, is still a major selling point. You have a candidate that really is against everything that Trump stood for and against Trumpism in general. That is a positive for, again, in a Democratic state with Democratic candidates. I think that Trumpism is still there. Trumpism still divides America.
But is it that strong? Is it the Wizard of Oz? Not in the way of, but before Dorothy and the Tin Man and all of them knew who he was, right? They were afraid of him. But now we go behind the curtain. Is this one layer or one curtain that is being peeled back?
Well, I think it is in a sense. Now, the interesting thing is the California recall in 2003. You remember Gray Davis was recalled, and that's when Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor. Now, people had that 2003 image in their heads. They thought that it was possible. If it happened in 2003, it could happen again. And I think that there is something fundamentally flawed about the California recall system, and that is that you can, if you get a group of people who get enough signatures, and with enough money you can get enough signatures, and all they need to do is get 50, they get 51% saying somebody ought to get recalled. And then even somebody like Larry Elder with about 18 or 20%, they can be installed as governor. That recall idea, it was a good idea when it started in 2013. It was thought of as a reform, a democracy reform, a pro-democracy progressive reform, but it has turned out to be a real waste of time and money and a real problem
Let me ask.
for
Let me ask you something real quick. This is a follow to that. According to my producer there on the ground, CNN's producer on the ground, Dr. Weber, who was just on, Shirley Weber, the Secretary of State, wants recall reform in California, higher signature percentage, keeping an eye on big money paid to gather signatures, and so on. Sorry, my phone just went out here. So what do you think of that? Signatures has strong words for elder complaints. So what do you think of that? Does it need to be overhauled? Does it need to be looked at?
Well, yes, I think it does, Don. I think we've seen from this particular escapade how much it does need to be overhauled. It was a tremendous waste of time and money and effort.
Thank you, Robert Reich. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you. Stay with us. We're going to take a quick break. And ahead, more in our breaking news. CNN projects the California recall election fails. Governor Newsom will remain in office.
Governor Newsom, come on. Let's be gracious. Let's be gracious in defeat. And by the way, we may have lost the battle, but we are going to win the war.
Larry Elder admitting defeat there in California tonight. Our breaking news: CNN projects California Governor Gavin Newsom defeats the recall and the attempt to remove him from office. I want to get straight to CNN's Kyung Law in Sacramento. Kyung, you have been following this recall from the very beginning. You're at Newsom headquarters. What is your takeaway from tonight's results? And actually listening to Larry Elder saying, let's be gracious in defeat.
Well, let's start with Larry Elder, because this is just developing right now. Remember, Larry Elder spent his closing message talking about baseless election fraud. We're not really hearing that. He had set up this website. He said that he was going to have lawyers file lawsuits. I didn't hear any of that. So it appears he's taking a different tack now. Does that suggest his political future? It's hard to say. I mean, certainly it seems like he is looking at the longer war, but the numbers for Republicans in this state are just simply are not on their side when it comes to a general election. And the recall, it's a different game, but in a general election where, evenly matched, the registration numbers just are not on the side of California Republicans. So what is the takeaway? Back to your other question, Don. As far as the governor here, we saw the governor take a much more somber tone and being very, governing. He wanted to reflect on the moment. He did get emotional at one point. We don't know if it's exhaustion or what, but the governor certainly is being reflective and looking back at what has happened over the last few months. And he talked in some of these final rallies on about the urgency of the moment and that Democrats have to fight. If there is a takeaway for the larger Democratic Party, and we've heard this messaging from the governor's campaign again and again, it is to fight and to fight for those national Democratic principles, namely in this time, those health principles, setting a contrast between what Democrats have done and what Republicans are outlining. So, that's the larger takeaway. It's hard to tell, though, Don, when you look at some of the closer battlegrounds, if that's actually going to work elsewhere.
Yeah, and if Larry Elder will keep speaking the way he's speaking tonight, you said at least tonight, we're not hearing about voter fraud and such, but the night is still young. We'll see. Thank you, Kyung. Kyung has been following this from the very beginning. We appreciate her reporting. We're going to go now to CNN's Kristen Holmes at the voting desk. Kristen, good evening to you. We have called the election. Larry Elder has accepted defeat, but what votes are actually still out there?
Yeah, Don, we're going to see votes trickling in for weeks to come now. And the big question, of course, is what will those votes actually look like? Keep in mind, the way that the votes come in, the results come in, is that the first wave we see is those pre-election votes. Those are likely mail-in ballots. Then we see the election day votes counted. That will still come in. There will still be a few of those to count. But as we see the 65% of those votes already counted, a lot of these counties have already gone through that number. So the big question is what's actually in those trickle of votes that we're going to see for the next couple of weeks? Well, you have to keep in mind this. The ballots postmarked by September 14th, so by today, can be received up until a week afterwards, received and counted. So shortly after the election is called, so in the next couple of days, we'll start to see counties putting out these updated reports every few days of their voter tallies. What's in them? Well, what's in them is ballots not processed before Election Day, ballots postmarked before or on Election Day, but they still arrived in time, and then ballots with signature issues that need to be cured. That is something we talked about a lot in the general election. What does cured mean? It means that there's some issue with the signature. Sometimes it's actually an issue with just the ballot in general, that the box looks a little bit smudged. They contact the voter. It takes a few days. This is a small amount of ballots. It's not going to be any kind of surge, and as we know, mostly, and this is a pattern, the votes that are coming in through mail-in voting are Democratic votes, so something to keep in mind. So all of this happens. Next, the counties have to finalize their results by the 14th of October, with the election being certified on the 22nd. Again, we are going to see several vote changes in the next couple of days, but we are already ahead of where they were back in 2020. By midnight on 2020, they actually only had 56% of the vote counted. Now, of course, we're already at 65. So we got a lot of votes already in, and I don't think it's going to take quite as long as it did in 2020. Don?
Won't be here until like 9 tomorrow morning, so that's good news. Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate it that much. Joining me now is the mayor of Oakland, California, Libby Schaaf. Mayor, thank you so much for joining. We appreciate it. You got a big smile on your face tonight. What's your reaction?
Oh, I am pretty ecstatic and relieved. California didn't just say no to the recall. We said no to stamping on women's rights, no to denying climate change, no to ignoring science and being a conspiracy theorist. This was huge for California, California's values, and people in Oakland are ecstatic.
Yeah. Well, I can tell, as I said, you've got a big smile on your face. Look, we know from the exit polling that the pandemic was the biggest issue for voters in this recall election. How do you think that impacted the race?
First of all, I'm glad that people weren't so distracted by the wildfires, by our pandemic, that they actually got out and voted. And I can tell you, Democratic mayors, we were on phone banks, and it's because Gavin Newsom has been in our communities. He was in Oakland for one of our first day of school. You know, shaking the hands of teachers, telling students that they were brilliant and encouraging them to wear those masks. and announcing a vaccination mandate for school workers. This is the same time, Florida is claiming that they're going to sue school districts for actually following the science. He's been congratulating the health workers that have been vaccinating people in our hardest hit neighborhoods. And so he has been on the ground really addressing the pandemic as well as the economic recovery that California has got to turn its attention to right now.
Mayor, were you worried?
I absolutely was worried. Oakland, myself personally, we were at war with Donald Trump for 4 years. Finally, voters have gotten better, leadership in the White House. And to see Larry Elder, who I personally thought was a crazier Trumpster than Trump himself, to see how close he got to becoming California's governor was terrifying for me and most of the people in my community. Right now, Gavin Newsom has 84% of the vote in our county. So I was worried. I think Democratic mayors were worried because we know what it's like to be at war with a governor. We talk to our colleagues across the country, and that's why we got into action. We were on those phones. We were rallying the troops, reminding people to vote, even though this is an off-season election. And boy, California, you did not disappoint.
Is this result more an indication of the opposition to Larry Elder, who is, really, really far to the right, a fringe candidate, than support for Newsom? Or you think it was more about support for Newsom? Larry Elder becoming the governor of California, it seems far-fetched, no matter what universe you're in.
It does, but I think with these numbers, it was both. It really was a resounding victory. This was not just a landslide. This was an old-fashioned trouncing. And it really shows that Gavin Newsom has a mandate to continue his priorities, to get back to work as the governor. Yes, Larry Elder absolutely motivated us as Democrats to get out there and make sure every single vote was cast. But it is not crazy. We are seeing these divisive politics, and we have got to do things to make sure that truth, facts, and science are prevailing.
Where I'm from, and I think Bakari as well, maybe Mark Preston here, we would just call it a beatdown. That's that's what happened tonight. Or, maybe a drubbing, depending on if you're from a fancy neighborhood. Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate
you.
He
got crushed.
There you go. He got crushed. Thank you very much, Mayor. We appreciate it. Be well.
Thank you. You too.
Make sure you stay with us. We're going to take a quick break. CNN projects Governor Gavin Newsom defeats the recall. Republican Larry Elder acknowledging his loss. More in our continuing coverage just ahead. Crushed.
Gallup decided to ask which of these 4 candidates had the biggest.
I think about just in the last, few days, and the former president put out saying this election was rigged. Democracy is not a football. You don't throw it around. It's more like a, antique vase. You can drop it and smash it in a million different pieces. And that's what we're capable of doing if we don't stand up to meet the moment and push back.
Well, there's quite a comparison there. Breaking news tonight, CNN projects California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom easily surviving the recall election, defeating the attempt to remove him from office. The leading Republican, Larry Elder, acknowledging his loss tonight. Back with me, Bakari Sellers, Alice Stewart, Mark Preston, Laura Barone Lopez. Hello to all of you. It was quite a comparison of fancy antique vase that you can smash. Basically, I get what he's saying. It's delicate, and you've got to nurture it. You've got to make sure you don't drop that vase.
That analogy wasn't for me. But look, I want to throw a little bit of cold water on all these hot takes that we're seeing on Twitter and around the country tonight. That there is not much that you can take from this race tonight. The one reason is because the recall system is so wonky in California. It only took.
We'll talk about that. Yeah.
I was just talking to one of the smartest people in the room, not Harry, but Phil Mattingly, and he recited the fact that it was 1.6 million signatures. That's all it took.
It takes 1.5, but they had 1.6.
They had
right?
1.6. So this isn't some huge, we want to get rid of Democratic policies in California. It was 1.6 individuals, Republicans who were in a different part of the state, the upper northeast part of the state, who said that this was what they wanted to do. So it wasn't a huge referendum on Democratic politics. That's first. Second, Larry Elder is someone who said he would vote against the Civil Rights Act. He said the minimum wage should be 0. He said the slave owners needed reparations. I mean, this is somebody who
He made inaccurate statements about vaccines and masking, including a recent CNN interview where he said it doesn't believe the science suggests that young people should be vaccinated or wear masks.
So he's a loon. And so you take these things together. And I think that one thing that Democrats and everyone else can take from this is the fact that people take COVID extremely seriously in this country. Protecting the public and public health is a winning issue. It shouldn't be a political issue, but it's a winning issue. Wearing masks, getting vaccines, mandates of such, that may be the only theme that you can take out of tonight's election.
Let's drill down on the whole idea of the recall, what you need, right? And you heard the former secretary say, she didn't say it on the air, but according to reports and to our producer on the ground, she thinks it needs to be reformed when it comes to the recall process in California. But also how it plays into this whole idea of minority rule in this country. You have a minority of people saying, don't vaccinate, don't wear masks, don't tell me what to do, liberty, freedom, also trying to take elections, steal elections, and so on and so forth. Talk to me, Laura, about the process in California and whether, because a lot of people think it should be recalled. I mean, it should be reformed.
And I think it's safe to assume that Democrats are going to tackle that now that Newsom has won this recall, that they're going to start looking at that about how to reform it. Because the recall, I'm a native Californian. I came from California, and it is very strange. So, like, even if Newsom had won 49% of the vote, it wouldn't have been enough. He would not have won. He would not have been able to keep his office. Someone like Elder could have won 22% of the vote if Newsom hadn't reached that threshold and still been able to win. Also, Newsom, even if voters decided to write his name in, he wouldn't have been able to win just based on the write-in. So there's a lot of questions. A lot of legal scholars in California started raising questions about whether or not the recall is unconstitutional. So you're starting to see a lot more conversation about the need for reforming the recall.
And what about this idea of minority rule around this country, Mark Preston? It seems to be the idea that, it's either the loudest voices or, I'm going to impose what I want on you, even though we're not the majority in this country. Look at what's happening with the election laws around the country and so on.
Yeah, let me take that and extrapolate a little bit more from it. When we talk about winners and losers of the night, and I'll throw a couple in at the end, but I really do think that the political parties right now, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, both of them are losers in the sense that what we saw is a recall election take place against a governor that it really shouldn't have taken place. Right. You saw a Republican Party in the largest state with an incredible amount of, folks who are Republican leaning, at least in California, and they can't seem to get their act together. When we talk about Trump and is Trumpism still alive and what will his effect be? The political parties have totally changed right now. They're not going to be what we are used to. If you look in the last 50 years, the Republican Party was really built in the likeness of Ronald Reagan, right? Well, that's gone. If you look at the Democratic Party, it was built in the likeness of the Clintons. And I know people hate me to say that, but it's true. And then it really became the likeness of Obama. But Obama, in many ways, I respect him. He has stepped back and said it's now the party, for the young. And if you look at the new CNN poll, right? I mean, Harry could jump in on this, but she's not eating over there, which she is. but if you look at the CNN poll, there is a 20-point gap between older Democrats' support of Joe Biden and younger Democrats' support of Joe Biden, which just goes to tell you that younger Democrats aren't necessarily beholden to the party. So I think when you look at this recall and how ridiculous it is and how screwed up our politics are, it goes way beyond that.
I think a little over an hour after really the dust has settled and we've heard from both of the candidates, I'll say this. I'm pleased after a bitter battle that we saw the governor gracious in his victory and Larry Elder gracious in his defeat. I thought it was a pleasant takeaway from this. That being said, what do we get out of this? Some people say all of these millions of dollars wasted. What do the Republicans get out of this? I spoke with someone this evening, one of the organizers of the recall. He says, yes, it did not come out as we wanted, but we energized the Republican base. We had more volunteers out there than they've had in many years. But having Larry Elder in there was an opening for the Democrats, and it gave them a foil to take it against him. And as you were talking with the mayor about what does this mean, I got a text also from the Faulconer campaign, and they're saying the overwhelming defeat here was a complete referendum on Larry Elder and what he stood for. And the message moving forward for Republicans is to win in California, the conservative Republican Party needs to, as soon as the filing deadline is done, get behind someone who represents not just the base, but the blue voters in the state.
How did we get here with Larry Elder? I mean, because Larry Elder was a defeat. The Republicans defeated themselves with Larry Elder. How did they get to the point where Larry Elder is the leading candidate in California?
Well, he obviously gets in there. He does have name ID, and he's the leader of the Republicans in the state. And the problem is they were only focusing on the base of the party. The victory there would have been
message.
The victory
Good
here
lesson.
is there were Democrats and independents that were signing on to this recall, and they were fine with having Newsom step down. But the idea of it being Larry Elder instead of Newsom turned them off, and Democrats and independents stayed home.
Well, I mean, just how farcical this all is, 3 months ago, Caitlyn Jenner was going to be the Republican nominee. And guess what? Caitlyn Jenner was going to open the Republican Party so that folks would be more inclusive of transgender and gay Americans. I'm kidding, but the fact of the matter
that was like.
If you look at where she ended up tonight, though, but it just goes to show you with the destruction of these political parties, Caitlyn Jenner, as of a few minutes ago, received 52,000 votes, only 1.2% of the vote. There are a lot of people out there that we have no idea who they are, who just got about the same amount of votes.
Talk about name recognition. I mean, that didn't help Jenner.
So you had me thinking, when you name winners or losers, there is a winner tonight who needed a victory, and that's Joe Biden. I mean, over the past few weeks and maybe this summer, it hasn't, the media has portrayed it not being a successful summer for Joe Biden. So this trouncing of Larry Elder, this trouncing of Trumpism is something the White House can claim a victory for. This is also a victory for Kamala Harris because it shows that California is still her base. Her and her team are still very successful in California. But one of the things that age dynamic that you talked about is so real in the Democratic Party. We had some very tense conversations about Dianne Feinstein and whether or not she should resign, or how she should handle this, because of the fact that people thought they were a heartbeat away from having Larry Elder choose the next Democratic senator, if so be it. So this is a real conversation the Democrats are having, and it's more of an age thing than anybody else.
Yeah, look, I just want to get their ballots still coming in. A live picture. There's a helicopter that just flew in to, what is it? Is it Downey, California? These are all ballots coming from all over LA County. So those are the ballots coming in.
I thought that was takeout from French Laundry.
Yeah. So.
If I can.
Bakari, that was a low blow. I hope you people at home did not hear that. I know it's late or early, depending on where you are in the country. We're going to take a quick break, so stand by, everyone. CNN projects that Governor Newsom defeats a recall. Much more of our continuing coverage in just a moment. That was low. So here is the breaking news on CNN. CNN projects a big victory for Governor Gavin Newsom, beating back the recall election, and Republican Larry Elder acknowledging defeat tonight. I want to bring in now CNN's national political reporter, voice of reporter Maeve Reston. Thank you very much for joining us, Maeve. Republicans hope for a resurgence with this recall, but it looks like they actually strengthened Governor Newsom. Am I wrong?
No, you are absolutely right about that. I mean, certainly Republicans had hoped that this would help them bring about some kind of resurgence in California, particularly among the many women who were angry about school closures over the last year. But in the end, we obviously have seen this huge blowout by Governor Newsom. And also a campaign advisor tells me that he will wake up tomorrow morning with $24 million in the bank for his reelect campaign, as well as an online army of volunteers that he had to marshal to help him defeat this effort. Not just volunteers here in California, but also across the country who texted and called people. The campaign also got tons of small dollar donations. So he will be able to tap into all of that as he heads into his reelection campaign next year. And a lot of people here also believe that he harbors White House ambitions down the line. So he's potentially been able to build up that national network that could help him if he decides to go that route. But we still will be talking about French laundry, even if he's on a presidential debate stage, Don.
Yeah, that's something that's going to be with him for quite a long time. As you're speaking, Maeve, we're looking at these ballots being brought in by helicopter to Downey, California. Coming from, I think they're all over LA County. But anyways, there we go. Brought in by sheriff's helicopter, by the way. Maeve Reston, thank you very much.
That's how we do it here.
Yeah, do it in style. Thank you very much. And safety as well. It's a sheriff helicopter. Thank you very much, Maeve. I want to bring in now Barbara Boxer, the former Democratic U.S. Senator from California. Senator, hello to you. I see a big smile as well. This was a lot more of a fight than you thought it would be for Governor Newsom, no?
No, because this is a tough time. You know that. I watch you all the time, and this hasn't been a happy time. And if you were leading a state as large as ours with 40 million people, so much pain, so much COVID, such a terrible economic downturn, all that on his shoulders. And yes, he made some mistakes and he stepped up and said, I was wrong. That's always hard to do. So, no, I think this is a big victory tonight. People can analyze it any way they want. But the bottom line is it's huge. And it's huge, I think, for a couple of reasons. Because all the factions of the Democratic Party united. We proved that we could be a big tent. We united behind a pragmatic progressive like Governor Newsom. And the Republicans have proven that they are attracted to the far right candidates. Larry Elder, who said the perfect minimum wage is $0, who said that women don't understand politics when our state was the first state to send 2 female senators to Washington. And Nancy Pelosi was on her way to being speaker when he made that statement. So I think it's a real warning to the Republicans. If you listen to your base, you're not going to make it. And I'm sad that, we've lost the mainstream Republicans, but that's the way it is. And we have to stick together and make sure we're strong in the midterms. It's going to be a tough.
As we're watching these ballots come in, this recall election cost hundreds of millions of dollars, Senator. It was launched by a minority of California voters. Is something wrong with California's recall system?
Absolutely. It needs to be reformed. It's in our Constitution. So the people are never going to give up this notion that they can recall a governor. But there's a couple of things that can be done really easily. For example, one simple one is vote on the recall, and then regardless of how you vote for the candidate you want and allow the sitting governor to be on that list. Because literally, Governor Newsom could have had a vote of, say, 49.8 not to recall, and Larry Elder could have had 38, and Larry Elder would have been governor. So allow the governor to be on that list. Also, we need to make it a little tougher, some more signatures to get this on the ballot. Last point I'd make is, look, we've got another election around the corner, just a few months away. There shouldn't be a recall when you're just less than a year from the primary of the next gubernatorial election. That's crazy. So I think the Republicans recognize that they can't win it in a regular election time because it's too big a turnout. And we surprised them and really turned out.
Senator Barbara Boxer, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. You can get some rest now.
Well, you too.
I'll see you soon. You be well. Thank you.
Bye.
We'll be right back. Tonight, as we look at this beautiful shot of the skyline of Los Angeles, CNN is projecting that Governor Gavin Newsom defeats the recall and the attempt to remove him from office. Back with me now, Harry Enton and Ron Brownstein. Okay, so what are your final thoughts here, Harry? Don't say I told you so.
No, I'm not going to say I told you so. Look, we tried to do a repeat. You know, all these days, you know, all we have is these repeats of movies, and we tried to repeat 2003. But the fact of the matter was the circumstances were so different. It started with the fact that the governor of California this time around had an approval rating north of 50%. Back in 2003, Gray Davis had an approval rating only about 25 to 30%.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. Look at who the opponents were in those two different recalls. Back in 2003, Arnold Schwarzenegger had a favorable rating in the exit poll of 51%. Tonight, Larry Elder's just 34%. So everything was just really different. California has really changed. And the fact of the matter is if you have an incumbent governor with an approval rating north of 50%, that governor is going to survive a recall,
right.
and that's what happened.
Save some room for Ron Brownstein, will you?
Yeah.
Ron.
Final thought, I go back to something you were discussing before. California has the lowest bar of any state in the country that allows a recall for getting on the ballot. You only need 12% of the voters who voted in the last gubernatorial election. And in today's highly polarized politics, that's simply kind of an implausible standard. The recall never advanced, as tonight's results show, beyond the core, essentially, of Trump voters. I mean, that's what it got. It got, roughly the same share of the vote that Trump got. You saw a third of the state said that Newsom's policies on COVID were too strict. That was the share of the vote that Trump got. And I think in that sense, it was a signal for Democrats and a warning for Republicans. The Republican messaging is all about the rights of the unvaccinated, the choices on the unvaccinated. What we saw, I think, in California is that there is, in fact, a silent majority of the vaccinated who are exasperated with those who are not getting the shot and ready for tougher measures against them. And I think for Democrats, while California is unique, it's the most, one of the most democratic states in the union, what it showed was the drawing contrast on this core issue of public health was a way to motivate Democratic voters, which is going to be job one for them in the midterm next year.
That sound you heard was my pen falling on the floor here.
Oh, Don.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Harry. Hey, guys. Thank you here.
Thank you.
Aren't you glad we're not on? We're supposed to be on, by the way, a little secret till 5 a.m. But, it happened.
Thank
But
you,
not
California.
Not tonight. Thank you, California.
We're not California.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. You guys had a good time?
Yeah.
Always. I'm glad to be back in studio.
Great to be back in studio.
Thank you guys for getting vaccinated so we could be
The
here
band
together.
is back together. Okay. Next recall, we don't know when, but we'll be back together. We'll see you. Don't go anywhere, anyone. CNN's coverage continues.
Hello, welcome to our viewers here in the United States and all around the world. I'm John Vors, coming up on CNN Newsroom. The era of election denialism has arrived. Even before California's Governor Gavin Newsom defeated a recall vote in a landslide, his Republican opponents were claiming the election was rigged. New revelations about former Vice President Mike Pence and just how far he was willing to go to help Donald Trump overturn the results of the 2020 election. And back in the weapons testing business, North Korea firing a pair of ballistic missiles just days after launching a newly developed long-range cruise missile. California's governor appears to have won the biggest fight of his political career, with CNN projecting he has defeated a recall vote by a huge margin. The recall effort was led by Republicans opposed to his handling of the coronavirus, homelessness, and the economy. The first question on the ballot, should Governor Newsom be recalled? About 2/3 of voters said no, a landslide victory. Exit polls show about 1/3 of voters said the COVID pandemic was the most important issue. Newsom pushed tough lockdowns, made masks and vaccines mandated. It was a sharp contrast to his main Republican challenger, Larry Elder, who opposed pandemic restrictions. A few hours ago, a very relieved Gavin Newsom thanked his supporters.
No is not the only thing that was expressed tonight. I want to focus on what we said yes to as a state. We said yes to science. We said yes to vaccines. We said yes to ending this pandemic.
Dan Merrico is live this hour at the Newsom headquarters in Sacramento, California. Lucy Cavanaugh is following the story from the Elder headquarters in Costa Mesa, also in California, but we'll go to Dan. I will start with you. This Newsom could emerge from all of this recall effort, in a much stronger position than he started.
Yeah, it's big news for Governor Newsom. It's also big news for Democrats, writ large in the United States. What we saw this race really boil down to is Governor Newsom, who is pressing strict COVID measures, who is running in line with the Biden White House on what they were trying to do on coronavirus, and then the Elder campaign, which was pledging to reverse many of the coronavirus orders that Governor Newsom has put in place. And the result is resounding. Newsom was certainly relieved tonight. It wasn't necessarily a victory speech, but he was clearly very relieved that he had passed this hurdle. The no vote had won overwhelmingly, and it is going to be almost a stamp of approval for Democrats across the country now, who can feel confident that they can run on these COVID measures, and that in some ways, strict COVID policy, tackling the coronavirus, is good politics. Now, it's also worth noting that Newsom nationalized this race. He made it about more than just California. And you note that, Elder has talked about homelessness and drought and other issues that focus on California that have hit California particularly hard. Newsom somewhat ignored those issues or avoided those issues and nationalized the race, calling on top Democrats across the country to come to California and rally on his behalf. And what he did was he compared Elder throughout the campaign to Donald Trump. That is another lesson that Democrats can take out of this race, that Trump may be out of office, he may not be in the White House anymore, but Democrats are rallied and are fired up about the prospect of defeating not just Trump, but Trumpism. That was a question for the party going into the 2022 midterms and some races in 2021. So going forward, what this taught Democrats is that they can run on COVID strict measures, and in some cases, like Governor Newsom did, they can also run on the legacy of Donald Trump. John?
Dan, thank you. Dan Merrico there live in Sacramento. Let's go over now to the Elder campaign headquarters in Costa Mesa. There we find Lucy Cavanaugh. She is with us live. And Lucy, there was a lot of talk before this recall vote from the Elder campaign about legal challenges and claims of rigged elections, that sort of stuff. What are they saying now?
Well, it's interesting, John. We've been here throughout the entire evening, the campaign billing this as a victory party, even though there would have had to have been a lot of in-person turnout by Republicans in order to close the lead that Newsom, the current governor of California, had in the early mail-in voting. Before the results were called by the television networks, a lot of the Republicans that we had talked to on the ground, the voters, the ordinary supporters here, did mention their concerns about fraud to us, baseless concerns at this point, but a lot of the folks we spoke to said that they were casting their ballots in person because of what they were worried about. But of course, the big question is, what would Larry Elder say? Is he going to continue to push those baseless claims of fraud as he had in the lead up to the election, or would he concede? He did seem to accept his loss. Take a listen.
My opponent, Governor Gavin Newsom. Come on. Let's be gracious. Let's be gracious in defeat. And by the way, we may have lost the battle, but we are going to win the war.
And this was important because we didn't know how much of a page he would take out of the former president, Donald Trump's playbook. Would he drag out this election fight, or would he concede? You heard him conceding in that speech there. He then went on to basically recycle his stump speech, talking about the issues that were important to, or continue to be important to, conservative Republicans here in California, issues like homelessness, crime, school choice, the drought that's been plaguing the state. He also talked about race a lot, accusing Democrats of politicizing race. He has managed to tap into the anger that a lot of conservative Democrats feel in California, a state in which Democrats outnumber Republicans nearly 2-1. And in terms of a preview of what he has in store going forward, he said, stay tuned. Perhaps his political ambitions aren't over yet. John?
Lucy, thank you. Lucy Kavanaugh there live for us in Costa Mesa. Appreciate it. Joining me now is Ron Brownstein, CNN senior political analyst and senior editor at The Atlantic. We have Caroline Heldman, Democratic strategist and professor of critical theory and social justice. Also with us, Lani Chen, former public policy director for the Republican Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. Thanks to all of you for being with us, a bit like old days. So, Ron, I'll start with you. If this margin of Newsom to win if it's as big as those exit polls now suggest, when he sits down at his desk on Wednesday to write out thank you cards, should the first one be to Donald Trump for giving him something to run against, and the second one to Larry Elder for making that possible by claiming to be further to the right of Donald Trump?
Maybe reverse the order. Look, you know what the recall got on the ballot by mobilizing discontent in the most conservative parts of the state, particularly to Governor Newsom's tough measures on lockdowns in response to COVID last year, all punctuated by his ill-fated decision to go to French Laundry. They were never able to expand beyond that. And as Larry Elder became the face of the recall and kind of the personification of the recall, it probably folded in on itself even more. And what Newsom was able to do in the final weeks of the election was really bring the whole campaign full circle. It got on the ballot because conservatives didn't like his response to COVID. He won going away because he was able to convince the broader electorate that the Republicans represented a threat to the health of the state by opposing mandates for masks and vaccines. And I think, obviously every state is different, but there was a clear lesson here that Democrats can lean into this contrast, mobilize their base, move a lot of independent voters, and leave Republicans kind of isolated by emphasizing the, quote, rights and choices of the unvaccinated at a time when 3/4 of Americans are vaccinated, and those who are increasingly exasperated with those who won't get the shot.
Well, Donald Trump issued a statement, I think it was last week, baseless claims about a rigged election. We also heard from Larry Elder, who's been talking about a landslide win in this recall. That was quickly followed by talk of voter fraud. Listen to this.
So many people are going to vote yes on the recall. There won't be any question about the outcome. I just hope my opponent is willing to accept the results when he loses. I have every hope that this election is going to be free of fraud, and it's going to be one of integrity.
So, Caroline, not only did Newsom get to run against Trumpism, but Trump seemed to be working to suppress the Republican vote in a way by declaring the election rigged. Is this now sort of a winning formula for races beyond California?
Well, it certainly wasn't in this particular race. And I think, as Ron pointed out, this is a state where if you're going to put down Trumpism, this is the state to do it in. It's 2-1 Democratic registration over Republican registration. But what was particularly kind of unnerving was that Larry Elder, even in his concession speech, didn't actually concede, right? And he's been a big proponent of the big lie, right? The idea that the 2020 election wasn't free and fair. And it really, it inspired the January 6th violent insurrection. We don't want that in California, but more importantly, this is the Republican strategy, and it's eroding our democracy. Our belief in free and fair elections is fundamental to actually having a democracy that is functioning.
Lani, how's this strategy of sort of claiming election fraud ahead of every major vote going to work when the Republicans actually win one?
Yeah, it's not. Quite frankly, I think, unfortunately, trying to look at the electoral process and trying to figure out ways to sow doubt, I don't think is a great long-term strategy for the Republican Party or for any other political party for that matter. I think the focus really has to be on how you expand the appeal of the message and the appeal of the policy prescriptions. And that really is kind of what happened tonight. I think Ron hit the nail on the head when he said, listen, the coalition necessary to come together to recall Gavin Newsom, the numbers just weren't there. You can't win in California with just Republican votes. I think that's got to be part of the formula. But to be successful, you have to really reach out and be more than that. You've got to be able to demonstrate that you can put together a coalition that's more than just the 24% of Republican voter registration in the state. And I think in this situation, that simply didn't happen.
And Ron, if we look across the country, this sort of election denialism, it seems to be in full swing. And it's unique right now to the Republicans, not just in California, but in other states where recounts are underway, that sort of stuff. Will it always stay with the Republican Party, or will it spread in a way across the political spectrum?
Well, look, right now it is centered in the Republican Party, and it is very much a kind of product of what Trump has done. You know, something like 60% of Republicans in the CNN poll that was released this week, the national poll, said that believing the election was stolen and that Donald Trump was the real winner in 2020 was an integral part of being a Republican. Half of Republicans in another poll by Monmouth University this month described the January 6th insurrection as legitimate protest. And we see, we see this being moved into action in state after state with Republican legislatures and governors passing laws making it more difficult to vote and increasing the opportunity for partisan manipulation of the vote counting. And that, John, that is why Democrats face an absolutely existential choice over the next few weeks in the Senate. They introduced today revised legislation to create a nationwide floor of voting rights to protect the independence of election administration. All the Democratic senators are likely to endorse it, and the question will really come to a head in the next few weeks. Will they give Republicans in the Senate a veto over that, or will Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema allow them to reform the filibuster in a way that allows them to pass this? No more consequential decision over any of the policies they face through the 2022 election.
But we look at Larry Elder as a candidate. He's a climate change denier. He opposes gun reform. He's against the minimum wage. He says he wouldn't have voted for the Civil Rights Act. He opposes abortion as well. So, Lani, well, he's not exactly representative of Main Street, California. Is he representative of Republicans in California?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be the question that we're going to see the answer to, I think, as we move toward 2022 in California. Certainly, the dynamic of the Republican Party is one that, to be competitive, again, I think the candidacies of people who are running in California as Republicans have to be consistent with where the state more broadly is. Now, obviously, you're not going to have a 100% matchup because, after all, Republicans aren't progressives. But my point is, you have to understand how much of this is driven by the need for candidates who, yes, have a message of reform, yes, have a message of change, but also understand the unique circumstance of running in California. And running in California is still going to be different than running in other parts of the country. And the recognition, the quicker that recognition comes, I think the sooner the Republican Party and Republican candidates in California become more competitive.
And just lastly to you, Caroline, how much does this win by Newsom, which was it was a huge win when you just look at the pure numbers, how much does this now help Joe Biden when it comes to his battles, when it comes to mandates for masks and vaccines?
Well, I think it is a national referendum on this, right? That the Democrats can go out nationally if they want to run on this. It doesn't matter where they are in the country, that this is a winning platform. And I think for Newsom, the wind is at his back. There's a whole get out the vote effort that the union spearheaded that really had an impact in this recall election. That's set up not only for his next campaign, but perhaps getting back some of these California seats in 2022. And I can imagine this being the playbook for what Democrats do in 2022.
Caroline, thank you as well. Ron Brownstein and Lanhee Chen. It's good to see all of you. It's been a long time.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Take care. Still to come, for more than a year, Mike Pence has been seen as the defender of the Constitution, who on that day in January stood up to Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election results. But a new book by Bob Woodward has a reality check. Well, the Elder campaign says lawyers have been on standby for days, just waiting to challenge the recall vote in California in what appears to be a replay of the Trump campaign strategy in 2020, filing dozens of baseless claims of fraud to undermine the credibility of the result. But in a new book by Bob Woodward, it's been revealed that during the certification process of the 2020 vote, former Vice President Mike Pence was not so much defender of the Constitution who stood up to Donald Trump, but rather someone who did the right thing only after every other option was well and truly exhausted. Pence sought advice from former Vice President Dan Quayle, who told him the US Vice President has no legal authority to do what Trump wanted. He then did what all vice presidents have done, and he oversaw the count of the Electoral College that was on January 6th. Now, here's part of the conversation when he gave the president the bad news. Trump asked, if these people say you had the power, wouldn't you want it? Pence replied, I wouldn't want any one person to have that authority. And that's when Trump responded. But wouldn't it be almost cool to have that power? Jessica Levinson is Professor of Law at Loyola Law School. She joins me now from Los Angeles. Welcome back. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, so the narrative from that day, let's go back. So Mike Pence resisted the pressure from Donald Trump. He did what was right. But now it seems it didn't happen without him trying almost everything he thought possible to do his master's bidding. So what would have happened if Pence had found a loophole, something which could justify doing what Trump wanted? Where would we be now?
Well, I mean, let's just say, first of all, wouldn't it be cool if we didn't have a constitutional republic? I mean, can you imagine that this is the argument here? Wouldn't it be cool if, like, we didn't have checks and balances and instead we had a monarch? So, but there's something serious there, right? Which shows that President Trump, former President Trump, really didn't understand our structure of government and or didn't respect it. And there's something serious here about Mike Pence not, of course, being the defender of democracy or the defender of our Constitution, but instead basically running through a house, trying to find every possible door. They're all locked. And then finally he just says, okay, I guess I have to run through the window. There's literally no other choice. I mean, you asked me, where would this leave us? I mean, that leaves us in a term that was overused, a potential constitutional crisis, where you have Vice President of the United States not doing his constitutional duty. As he correctly concluded, there are no loopholes, there are no end runs. This was the only choice. He had a very ministerial task of simply saying, yes, I bless the results of the Electoral College.
Yeah, we came that close, it seems, a lot closer than most people realize. The other big headline from this book concerns the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley. In the weeks after Trump lost the election but still held office, Milley was worried he would go rogue. And Woodward writes about a secret meeting when Milley told officials in charge of the National Military Command Center, basically the Pentagon War Room, that no one would follow orders from anyone unless he, Milley, was involved. Here's part of the book. No matter what you are told, you do the procedure, you do the process, and I'm part of that procedure, Milley told the officers, according to this book. He then went around the room, looked each officer in the eye, asked them to verbally confirm they understood. Got it? Milley asked, according to this book. Yes, sir. And that was repeated again and again. There are no laws which limit the powers of a defeated or retiring president. He remains president until the next one is sworn in. Donald Trump may not have started a nuclear war, but he has undermined confidence and faith in American democracy. So how could a losing president be restrained in future from doing what Trump did?
This is something that is such a good question. It's something that you and I talked about for maybe the last half decade now, which is the Trump administration really was a stress test on our democracy, and it showed where the cracks in the Constitution are. Well, for instance, in this case, why do you have such a long period of time between the election and the inauguration? In any other job in America, if you need to fire somebody, 14 days at most, or I'm going to stand next to you while you clear out your box and we'll escort you to the parking lot. So we have a couple of places here where we see that the chief executive not only can stay far past the election, but also has these really unfettered controls where I think we've just been, frankly, very lucky in the past where we had presidents who certainly transgressed certain norms, who certainly acted in really questionable and problematic ways, but they didn't so transgress the norms and the guardrails that we were in this situation. And frankly, I mean, there but for the grace of many different things, did we end up in this place where we still have an intact Constitution? And yes, there are places where we can look at how chief executives, one, have a lot of authority under the Constitution, and two, take a lot of authority, maybe when it's not even granted, and we can think about confining that.
You know, at one point, Milley apparently likened Trump to a 4-engine plane with 3 of them out and no landing gear for these last couple of weeks. And that 1-engine plane, it's now the clear preference for Republicans to be the leader of their party. 51% believe, this Republicans believe, if he was at the top of the ticket for 2024, it would be an advantage in taking back the White House. I guess the question is whether he runs or not. It's almost beside the point because it seems increasingly Republicans are now running on the Trump book, declaring voter fraud even before the votes are counted and undermining the result.
Well, I'm talking to you from California, and in the introduction, you talked about how the recall was just defeated. But the thing that wasn't defeated are these baseless allegations of voter fraud, which come straight from the Trump playbook. Now, clearly, they didn't begin with Trump. Clearly, they're not going to end with Trump. But the astounding thing is not that President Trump just trumpeted these baseless attacks on our elections, but that so many people, as you said, want him to be the standard bearer, want this to be the message for the Republican Party. And this is a really dangerous game for the Republican Party. This is a little bit of Russian roulette to continue to say you cannot trust the electoral process, because at a certain point, yes, you use it to try and justify restrictive voting laws, but also it can turn people off from the process. Republicans really only want to turn Democrats off from the process. They don't want to turn their own voters off. This is a really high stakes game. And, it feels like the last gasp of a party that knows that it's losing key strongholds. Look at what happened in Georgia. Look at what almost has happened in Texas. And look at, this party still looking at President Trump as their standard bearer.
Yeah, and still, essentially as the leader of the party and taking control and taking the lead. Jessica, thank you. Jessica Levinson there for us in Los Angeles. Appreciate it. U.S. lawmakers from both parties are demanding answers. Coming up, a second day of questioning for the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, on the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Plus, the U.S. military claims it thwarted an ISIS attack at the Kabul airport, but new evidence suggests the deadly drone strike may have targeted the wrong person. A CNN investigation is next. Welcome back, everyone. I'm John Vors. You're watching CNN Newsroom. And CNN is projecting a landslide win for California's Democratic Governor, Gavin Newsom. The first question on Tuesday's special election ballot, should Governor Newsom be recalled? About 2/3 of voters said no. Newsom's handling of the coronavirus pandemic sparked the recall effort last year. Republicans, led by talk show host Larry Elder, were furious over strict lockdowns and promised to overturn mask and vaccine mandates. Newsom says voters said yes to science, vaccines, and ending the pandemic.
I'm humbled and grateful to the millions and millions of Californians that exercised their fundamental right to vote and express themselves so overwhelmingly by rejecting the division.
Well, the U.S. Congress, which often finds it difficult to agree on the day of the week, has found a moment of rare bipartisanship. And it's coming from frustration with the Biden administration over the withdrawal from Afghanistan. For a second day, the Secretary of State answered questions from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Republicans called the troop withdrawal a strategic error and the evacuation the worst foreign policy catastrophe in a generation. Antony Blinken made a point of highlighting the withdrawal agreement, which was negotiated by the Trump administration.
When President Biden took office in January, he inherited an agreement that his predecessor had reached with the Taliban to remove all remaining U.S. forces from Afghanistan by May 1st of this year. As part of that agreement, the previous administration pressed the Afghan government to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners, including some top war commanders. By January of 2021, the Taliban was in its strongest military position since 9/11.
Lawmakers from both parties seemed miffed as to why the Defense Secretary was not available to answer questions as well. Lloyd Austin is scheduled to appear before a different committee later this month. For the last 2 weeks, CNN has been investigating the U.S. military's final drone strike, which targeted a car in Kabul, Afghanistan, just hours before all U.S. troops were withdrawn. The U.S. military claims they hit a legitimate terrorist target. But CNN's investigation raises some serious questions about the U.S. government's accounts of what happened that day. And a warning to some of our viewers here, this report contains some very graphic scenes and may be difficult to watch. But first, live to CNN's Anna Coren, who's been working the story. She is with us now from Hong Kong. So, Anna, what can you tell us?
Well, John, look, there are serious doubts as to whether, in fact, the US military actually got the right target, possibly killing 10 innocent civilians. As you say, this has been a 2-week investigation by CNN, and what we have learned paints a very different picture.
Screams of horror in a Kabul neighborhood on the last Sunday afternoon of August, as residents desperately try in vain to extinguish the fireball caused by a Hellfire missile airstrike. First I thought this is an attack on the whole of Afghanistan. I did not know the attack was only on our house. The target, a white sedan that had been under US military surveillance for the past 8 hours, according to a US official with knowledge of the operation. It had just driven into the residential compound with father of 7 and NGO worker Zamarai Ahmadi behind the wheel. I saw my father lying in the car. There was shrapnel in his chest, throat, everywhere. Blood was flowing through his ears. But the strike didn't just take out the 43-year-old father. According to them, 2 other men were also killed, along with 7 children, 3 of whom were toddlers. Our children were in such a state that we tried to identify them from their hands, ears or nose, says Zamarai's cousin. None of them had their hands and feet intact and in one place. They were all in pieces. Charred body parts, pieces of skull with chunks of hair and a foot melted into a sandal were among the remains taken to the morgue. Zamarai's 2-year-old nephew lies on a gurney as a relative gently strokes his face. 10 coffins filled with only partial remains. Their names written in black marker, the only distinguishable feature.
We had very good intelligence.
US claims to have intelligence. There was explosive material inside the car that was to be used in an imminent attack on Hamid Karzai International Airport by ISIS-K. Just days before, an ISIS-K suicide bomber had blown himself up at Abbey Gate. 13 US service members and more than 170 Afghans were killed. But for the past 2 weeks, CNN has been investigating the US military's claims about the drone strike, interviewing more than 24 people, family members, neighbours, NGO staff and multiple bomb experts that paint a very different version of events. We've also been given access to the CCTV hard drive of the NGO office that day and reviewed all the footage. For 15 years, Zamarai worked as a technical engineer for Nutrition Education International, a US-based NGO that introduced soybeans to Afghanistan in 2003 to help feed the poor and reduce malnutrition.
He is always caring for the people who are in need, and then he's a compassionate heart.
The organisation's founder says the Toyota Corolla Zamarai was driving belonged to the NGO, and he was responsible for picking up colleagues, distributing soybeans to Afghans in refugee camps and running operations. US military officials have told CNN they had been monitoring chatter from an ISIS safe house in Kabul for 36 hours, when a car pulled out of the compound around 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. It was from that moment US surveillance aircraft began following the car, not knowing who the driver was. But in an interview with one of Zamarai's colleagues who was with him all day, he claims Zamarai picked him up at about 8:45 a.m. And around 9 a.m. they stopped at the country director's house to collect a laptop to take to work.
Because he forgot his laptop bag there, and we took his laptop back.
The US has told CNN there was intelligence that the car was being directed from the safe house on a route around the city, instructing the driver to meet a motorcyclist, and that it did. Zamarai's colleague says after collecting the laptop, they picked up another colleague and then stopped at a busy cafe to get breakfast, claiming they did not come into contact with any motorcyclists on their journey to the office. The only motorcyclist they did talk to was the security guard at the NGO office, seen here with his bike on CCTV. For the next few hours, Zamarai and his colleagues carry out various tasks, visiting Taliban security stations for permission to resume operations since the Taliban takeover. They also visit a bank and return to work for lunch at 2 p.m. Around 2:30 p.m, Zamarai begins filling water containers to take back home to his family, who have no access to running water, a task he'd been doing for months, according to his colleagues. They say they then helped load the containers into the car before leaving around 4 p.m. The US military says around the same time, drone footage showed the driver loading heavy packages with other men into the car, which they suspected were explosives, possibly for the imminent attack. Colleagues say Zamarai dropped them off before he drove to his family compound, also home to his 3 brothers and their families. Around 4:45 p.m, the US says the car arrived at a residential location and another male approached the car. The military claims it had reasonable certainty that they had a legitimate ISIS-K target and took the shot. It was only afterwards that the US realised there were 3 children within the vicinity of the car. The family says there were actually 7. A US official tells CNN there was a significant secondary explosion, possibly caused by a suicide vest or explosives in the car that may have killed the children. 2 bomb experts we spoke to, who both viewed the same footage CNN filmed from the scene, say there is no evidence of a significant secondary explosion, stating there would have been major structural damage to the surrounding buildings and vegetation, and that the nearby SUV would have overturned. One of them noted if a secondary blast was seen from US surveillance, it most likely was the vehicle gas tank exploding.
This over-the-horizon, having incomplete information, but conducting the airstrike anyway, this is the modus operandi for the US military now, and there's just so many risks and harm to civilians that comes with that.
A US military investigation into the drone strike is underway.
That at least one of those people that were killed was an ISIS facilitator. So were there others killed? Yes, there are others killed. Who they are, we don't know. But at this point, we think that the procedures were correctly followed and it was a righteous strike.
A Pentagon statement released over the weekend defended the strike based on good intelligence, preventing an imminent threat, and that no other military works harder than we do to prevent civilian casualties. But many questions are being raised as to whether they got the wrong target. How do you know from the sky what is here, says Zamarai's brother. There were children in and around the car and you targeted them. Isn't it a crime? You came here and shattered our hearts into pieces. The following day, ISIS-K launched a rocket attack towards the airport from a Toyota Corolla. The attack was countered by the missile defense system. That same day, Zamarai's family buried their dead. 10 graves on a desolate hillside overlooking Kabul, belonging to a family demanding answers and justice.
Now, John, we're obviously in touch with the family who are clearly suffering. They've had to change houses because of this link to the terrorist network ISIS-K. I think it's also really important to note that Zamarai had applied for a P2 visa to the United States for him and his family through his Californian-based NGO. This happened just days before the strike. This was a man who wanted to flee Afghanistan and start a new life in America.
Yeah, so many. And thank you, Anna Corin, there live for us in Hong Kong. Well, they just keep on coming. Days after testing long-range cruise missiles, North Korea has now fired 2 ballistic missiles as well. Details ahead. Just days after testing a newly developed long-range cruise missiles, North Korea has fired 2 unidentified ballistic missiles into the waters of its east coast. Confirmation coming from high-ranking military officials in Seoul. CNN's Paula Hancock is in Seoul with details. Paula.
Well, John, this is information we're now getting from the Joint Chiefs of Staff here in South Korea, saying that they believe that these 2 ballistic missiles were fired from the centre of the country of North Korea. They went about 800 kilometres, that was the range, 60 kilometres altitude, and from that they have decided that these are 2 short-range ballistic missiles. Now, there was one of those missiles fired earlier this year, but it's certainly more rare that we're seeing this kind of activity from North Korea. But it does come just a few days after they said that they actually fired 2 long-range cruise missiles over the weekend. Now, when it comes to today's launches, we know that they happened local time around 12:34 and then another at 12:39 p.m. in the afternoon, around lunchtime. Japan has said that it is very concerned. The Prime Minister saying that it is outrageous, these launches, obviously firing in the direction of Japan, landing in the waters off the east coast of Korea, but not going into Japanese territorial waters. Now, we also heard from the US military, the Indo-Pacific Command, saying that it didn't hold any imminent threat to the United States, but it does just show the destabilizing impact that these missile launches and the military capabilities and decisions by North Korea can have on the region. And it comes at a time when there's a lot of diplomatic activity going on, not involving North Korea, but talking about North Korea. We've got the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Seoul. He has been talking with his South Korean counterpart. On Tuesday, you had the top nuclear envoys from the US, Japan and South Korea meeting in Tokyo. They decided that there had to be, quote, dialogue and diplomacy urgently needed to talk about the denuclearization of North Korea. And then, of course, a day later, North Korea fires these missiles. These particular ones, unlike the ones over the weekend, do violate the United Nations Security Council resolutions. John?
Paula, thank you. Paula Hancock's live was there with the very latest in Seoul. Thank you. Well, with COVID now claiming the lives of 1 in every 500 Americans, US President Joe Biden wants to convince global leaders to do more to keep the world safe. His plan, that's next on CNN Newsroom.